For most of human history, people believed their ancestors were exactly who stories said they were. Tribes remembered tribes, kingdoms remembered kingdoms, families repeated the same names beside the same fires for centuries. Yet inside the bones buried beneath deserts, caves, and frozen valleys, another history waited in silence. Ancient DNA has revealed that nearly every human population on Earth is the result of migrations, disappearances, encounters, and mixtures nobody alive remembered. Entire peoples vanished without leaving a language behind, while strangers became ancestors without anyone noticing. The deeper scientists look into the human past, the less stable the idea of where we come from begins to feel. And if our origins are far more tangled than memory ever admitted, then what part of human identity was ever truly permanent? For thousands of years, human beings believed the past survived through memory. A village elder could point toward a mountain and describe where the ancestors once crossed. A family could repeat the same names across generations until the names themselves became part of identity. Kings carved victories into stone. Priests copied lineages onto fragile paper. Entire civilizations trusted that history could be preserved if enough people remembered it together. Yet memory has always been selective. Stories change shape while passing through centuries. Victories are remembered longer than defeats. Some migrations become legends, while others disappear completely. Long before ancient DNA entered science, much of humanity's origin story depended on fragments that survived almost by accident. A burned library, a collapsed kingdom, or a lost language could erase entire chapters of human history forever. In many places, silence replaced memory long before modern historians arrived. This silence surrounded ancient human bones for most of scientific history. Archaeologists could measure skulls, examine tools, and estimate age from layers of earth, but the people themselves remained distant. A skeleton buried inside a cave might reveal signs of injury, disease, or hard labor, yet deeper questions stayed unanswered. Who were these people related to? Where had their ancestors traveled from? Did they vanish completely, or do their descendants still walk the earth today without realizing it? For a long time, these questions remained almost impossible to answer with certainty. The bones stayed quiet. Then, slowly, science learned how to listen. The discovery did not happen all at once. During the late 20th century, researchers began experimenting with ways to recover tiny fragments of genetic material from ancient remains. DNA is fragile. Heat, water, bacteria, and time slowly destroy it. Under ordinary conditions, almost all genetic material disappears after death. Early scientists believed usable ancient DNA might be impossible to recover from very old remains. Contamination created constant problems. Modern human contact could easily overwhelm ancient samples. A single careless breath near a specimen might damage years of work. Yet some environments protected traces of the past better than others. Deep caves, dry climates, frozen ground, and stable temperatures allowed microscopic fragments of DNA to survive far longer than expected. Inside teeth, dense bone, and preserved tissue, small pieces of ancient genetic code sometimes endured for tens of thousands of years. The realization changed archaeology forever. Suddenly, the human past no longer depended entirely on written records or oral traditions. Ancient bones carried their own biological memory. By reading genetic patterns preserved inside those remains, scientists could begin reconstructing relationships between populations separated by enormous distances and timescales. A skeleton found in Siberia could reveal unexpected links to populations living thousands of miles away. A burial site in Europe could expose migrations nobody had previously imagined. In some cases, DNA evidence contradicted long-accepted historical theories that had seemed secure for generations. This new field, known as paleogenetics, transformed ancient graves into archives. The shift was quiet at first. There were no dramatic moments visible to ordinary people. Inside laboratories, researchers wearing protective suits handled tiny bone fragments with extraordinary care. Machines analyzed damaged genetic sequences piece by piece, slowly assembling incomplete puzzles from molecules older than recorded history. Results often emerged gradually, requiring years of verification before the scientific community accepted them. But beneath this slow process, something profound was happening. Humanity was beginning to discover that its past had been far more fluid than earlier generations believed. Ancient DNA revealed movement everywhere. People crossed landscapes repeatedly over thousands of years. Populations mixed, separated, disappeared, and merged again. Communities that once seemed isolated were often connected through migrations too ancient for memory to preserve. The deeper scientists looked into the genetic past, the harder it became to draw simple lines between peoples, regions, and identities. Even the idea of a stable ancestral homeland started to feel less certain. Many modern populations carry genetic traces from multiple ancient worlds, layered together across time. Some ancestors survived through language and culture. Others survived only through fragments hidden silently inside human cells. The bones that once appeared silent were no longer silent at all. They had simply been waiting for humans to develop the tools capable of hearing them. And once those voices began to emerge from caves, ice, and forgotten graves, the story of human origins became far larger and far less comfortable than anyone had expected. The survival of ancient DNA is, in many ways, an accident of temperature, darkness, and time. Every living human body constantly repairs and replaces damaged cells, but death ends that process immediately. After the body stops functioning, microscopic decay begins almost at once. Moisture breaks tissues apart, oxygen reacts with molecules, bacteria feed on soft organs, and eventually penetrate bone itself. Across centuries, roots move through graves, minerals enter cracks, and changing climates slowly erase what remains. Under most conditions, DNA fragments into pieces too damaged to read. This is why the majority of humans who have ever lived left no recoverable genetic trace behind. Entire generations disappeared into the soil without preserving enough biological material for modern science to study. Yet in rare environments, the destruction slowed just enough for fragments to survive. Cold regions became especially important. In Siberia, Alaska, and northern caves untouched by major temperature changes, frozen ground acted almost like a natural vault. Dry deserts also preserved remains surprisingly well, because bacteria require moisture to thrive. Some caves protected bones from sunlight, rain, and severe environmental shifts for tens of thousands of years. Even then, survival was never guaranteed. Ancient DNA usually survives only in tiny amounts, heavily damaged and mixed with contamination from later centuries. Scientists often compare the process to reconstructing a burned book from scattered ash. Many ancient genomes are incomplete. Some contain gaps that can never be recovered. Researchers must carefully distinguish genuine ancient sequences from modern contamination introduced by excavation, museum storage, or simple human handling. The challenge becomes even greater because ancient DNA changes chemically over time. Certain molecular patterns break down in predictable ways, and scientists learn to recognize these signatures as proof that the material is genuinely ancient. This allowed researchers to separate authentic genetic fragments from modern interference with increasing confidence. One major breakthrough came when scientists discovered that the densest bones in the human body preserved DNA better than expected. The petrous bone, located deep inside the skull near the inner ear, became especially valuable because its compact structure protected microscopic material from environmental damage. Teeth also served as important genetic containers. Inside these small protected spaces, ancient human information sometimes endured across unimaginable stretches of time. Once sequencing technologies improved during the early 21st century, researchers could analyze these fragments far more efficiently than before. Suddenly, ancient DNA studies expanded rapidly. Skeletons excavated decades earlier gained new importance because modern laboratories could now examine them in ways earlier scientists never imagined possible. Museums holding old human remains unknowingly possess biological records waiting to be opened. As ancient genomes accumulated, certain assumptions about human history began to weaken. Before DNA evidence, archaeologists often relied heavily on objects left behind by ancient peoples. Pottery styles, burial customs, tools, and architecture helped researchers identify cultural groups. If a new pottery style appeared in a region, historians sometimes assumed ideas had spread peacefully from neighboring populations. Ancient DNA complicated this picture. In several cases, genetic evidence showed that large numbers of people had physically migrated into those regions instead of merely exchanging ideas. Sometimes entire populations had been partially replaced over centuries without leaving obvious written evidence. In Europe, for example, ancient DNA revealed multiple major migration waves shaping the continent across different eras. Early hunter-gatherers, incoming farmers from Anatolia, and later steppe pastoralists each contributed substantial ancestry to modern Europeans. These were not small isolated movements. They involved large demographic changes unfolding slowly across generations. Similar patterns appeared elsewhere in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Human history increasingly resembled a network of overlapping journeys rather than separate civilizations growing quietly in isolation. Ancient DNA also forced scientists to reconsider how identity works across time. A population could disappear culturally while surviving genetically through later generations. Languages vanished, kingdoms collapsed, names were forgotten, yet descendants continued living, often unaware of how many ancient peoples still existed within them biologically. The deeper researchers explored ancient ancestry, the more difficult it became to match modern identities neatly onto the distant past. Human populations had always been moving, mixing, adapting, and changing. Even regions separated by mountains, deserts, or oceans were rarely as isolated as once believed. Beneath modern borders lay thousands of years of migration paths layered together invisibly. In this way, ancient DNA did more than provide scientific data. It altered humanity's emotional relationship with the past. The old image of stable ancestral lines stretching cleanly backward through history began to dissolve. Instead, the human story appeared restless, interconnected, and unfinished. Bones buried in silence for millennia were revealing that the paths leading to the present had never been straight. For much of modern history, people often imagined ancestry as something fixed and continuous. A nation told itself where its people came from. Families preserved stories about distant grandparents. Some cultures believed they had occupied the same land since the beginning of memory itself. Even when historians acknowledged migrations or invasions, many still pictured the past as relatively stable, with recognizable groups remaining separate across long periods of time. Ancient DNA slowly began to disturb that image. The disturbance was not loud at first. It arrived through percentages, sequences, and careful scientific papers written in restrained language. Yet behind the technical details stood a much larger realization. Human history had been shaped by movement far more deeply than most societies ever understood. The people living in one place today are often connected to multiple ancient populations that arrived at different times, under different conditions, carrying different languages and traditions. Some arrived peacefully. Others arrived during famine, climate shifts, or conflict. Many disappeared as visible cultures long ago. Their names vanished. Their myths vanished. Yet fragments of them remained alive inside later populations. This created an unsettling possibility. Much of what humans believed about their origins may have been incomplete not because people were dishonest, but because memory itself could not survive long enough to preserve the full truth. Oral traditions can carry astonishing detail across centuries, but they also compress time. Separate migrations may merge into a single legend. Ancient encounters become symbolic stories instead of literal history. Written records preserve more information, yet writing itself appeared only recently compared to the enormous scale of human existence. Modern humans have lived for roughly 300,000 years. Writing covers only a tiny fraction of that time. Most human lives unfolded in silence long before the first historical documents appeared. Ancient DNA opened a small window into that silent world. Through this window, scientists discovered histories no surviving culture fully remembered. In some regions, entire populations had once flourished before disappearing almost completely from the archaeological record. In other places, people who seemed culturally continuous were genetically shaped by repeated migrations from distant lands. The more evidence accumulated, the more humanity's past resembled an ocean of overlapping journeys instead of separate islands of civilization. This realization carried emotional consequences beyond science. Identity has always been tied to origin. Humans naturally search for belonging through ancestry, homeland, language, and shared memory. Ancient DNA complicated those categories without fully erasing them. A modern population may genuinely preserve ancient cultural traditions, while also carrying ancestry from many earlier peoples whose stories are forgotten. A person may inherit genetic traces from populations that vanished thousands of years before their modern nation even existed. The human body became a kind of archive, deeper than recorded history itself. Yet the archive is incomplete. DNA can reveal relationships, migrations, and shared ancestry, but it cannot fully restore lost lives. It cannot tell us what ancient mothers whispered to children beside fires during winter storms. It cannot recover songs, fears, dreams, or beliefs that disappeared without witnesses. Two populations may share genetic ancestry while having entirely different cultures and identities. Ancient DNA reveals connections, but not the full meaning people gave to those connections while they were alive. This limitation matters because the human past is larger than biology alone. Even so, the discoveries transformed how many scientists understand civilization. Earlier generations sometimes described history as a progression of distinct peoples rising and falling separately. Ancient DNA instead suggested continual interaction. Humans met one another repeatedly across enormous distances and timescales. Trade routes carried not only goods, but families and descendants. Climate changes pushed populations into unfamiliar territory. Small encounters between groups could leave biological traces lasting tens of thousands of years. Sometimes the most influential ancestors in modern populations belong to groups history never recorded by name. Gradually, ancient DNA began changing the questions researchers asked. Instead of asking whether populations were pure or isolated, scientists focused more on when and how populations mixed. Instead of imagining civilizations as sealed worlds, they studied networks of migration stretching across continents. Human identity appeared less like a fixed inheritance and more like an ongoing process shaped by movement, adaptation, and survival. Beneath every modern society lay countless forgotten journeys layered invisibly beneath the surface of time. The ancient bones buried under caves, deserts, and frozen ground were no longer simply remains of the dead. They had become evidence that humanity's story was far more interconnected than memory alone had ever been able to preserve. Long before cities, kingdoms, or borders existed, humanity lived in motion. The modern world often gives the impression that people naturally belong to fixed places. Nations draw lines across maps. Families remain in the same towns for generations. Cemeteries create the feeling that ancestors stayed rooted to one landscape across centuries. Yet for most of human existence, stability was rare. Early humans survived by adapting to changing climates, following animal migrations, searching for water, and responding constantly to environmental pressure. Movement was not unusual. Movement was life itself. Around 300,000 years ago, the earliest known Homo sapiens appeared in Africa. The exact details of those first populations remain incomplete, but fossil evidence and genetic research both suggest that humanity's deepest roots lie there. Ancient DNA later confirmed that all modern humans ultimately share African ancestry, even though the paths outward became extraordinarily complex over time. Early human groups were small compared to modern populations. They traveled across grasslands, forests, coastlines, and river systems in search of food and safety. Generations passed without permanent borders. One valley might support people for decades before drought or shifting animal patterns forced movement elsewhere. Ice ages repeatedly reshaped entire regions of the planet. Sea levels rose and fell dramatically. Deserts expanded and contracted. Forests vanished, then returned centuries later. Human beings adapted by continuing to move. What ancient DNA revealed is that these migrations were not isolated events happening once or twice in distant history. They occurred repeatedly across thousands of years. Some movements involved only small bands of families. Others reshaped entire continents. The process was usually slow. A migration did not necessarily mean a massive crowd marching toward a destination. More often, populations expanded gradually, generation by generation. A community living near a coastline might move slightly farther over decades. Children would grow up considering the new territory home, while their descendants moved farther still. Across centuries, these small adjustments accumulated into enormous human journeys. Ancient DNA allowed scientists to trace some of these paths with increasing clarity. One of the most important migrations in human history occurred roughly between 60,000 and 70,000 years ago, when groups of modern humans expanded outward from Africa into other parts of the world. The exact routes remain debated, but evidence suggests humans moved through the Middle East into Asia, eventually reaching Europe, Australia, and later the Americas. These journeys unfolded across immense stretches of time. Entire generations were born, lived, and died, without understanding they were participating in migrations that would shape the future of humanity. Ancient people did not possess maps showing continents waiting ahead. They followed coastlines, rivers, herds, seasons, and survival itself. Many probably believed the world extended only as far as memory and landscape allowed them to imagine. Ancient DNA also revealed that migration rarely happened into empty lands. Early modern humans encountered other human groups during their expansions. Neanderthals already lived across parts of Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans occupied regions of Asia, though much about them remains mysterious even today. Other populations may have existed as well, leaving traces too fragmented for scientists to fully identify. Human history was not a simple story of one group replacing another in isolation. It was a long sequence of encounters, separations, mixtures, and disappearances unfolding over tens of thousands of years. Climate played a powerful role in shaping these movements. During colder periods, massive ice sheets covered large portions of the northern hemisphere, making some regions nearly impossible to inhabit. Sea levels dropped, exposing land bridges that no longer exist today. One of these land bridges connected Siberia and North America during the last ice age, allowing human populations to gradually enter the Americas. Later, when temperatures rose and ice melted, those pathways disappeared beneath the ocean. Ancient migrations became hidden beneath water and time. The modern world often treats continents and nations as permanent realities, but ancient humans experienced geography differently. Landscapes changed constantly around them, rivers shifted direction, coastlines moved, grasslands became deserts. Entire habitable regions vanished under ice or rising seas. Ancient DNA revealed that humanity adapted to these transformations not by remaining still, but by continuing forward into uncertainty. Beneath modern populations lies the memory of countless journeys taken by people who could never know where their descendants would eventually live. The deeper scientists traced these migrations, the clearer one truth became. Human history did not spread outward in straight lines from stable origins. It moved like water across changing terrain, dividing, reconnecting, and reshaping itself again and again across the ancient world. As modern humans moved across unfamiliar landscapes, they entered a world already inhabited by other kinds of humans. Today, it is easy to imagine humanity as a single, uninterrupted line leading directly from the distant past to the present. Ancient DNA revealed something far more complicated. For much of prehistory, multiple human groups existed at the same time. They lived in different climates, adapted to different conditions, and sometimes crossed paths in ways that would leave permanent marks on the future of our species. One of the most well-known of these groups was the Neanderthals. They lived across large areas of Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before disappearing roughly 40,000 years ago. Long before ancient DNA studies, archaeologists already knew Neanderthals were intelligent and capable humans. They made tools, controlled fire, buried some of their dead, and survived harsh Ice Age conditions that would have been difficult for modern people to endure. Yet for generations, many scientists still pictured them as separate from modern humans in almost every meaningful way. Then ancient DNA changed the story. In 2010, researchers published evidence showing that Neanderthals and modern humans had interbred. This discovery transformed the understanding of human origins almost immediately. People living today outside Africa carry small percentages of Neanderthal ancestry within their genomes. The amount varies, but the implication was profound. Modern humans were not entirely separate from the populations they encountered during migration. They formed relationships, had children, and passed genes forward into future generations. The ancient world was not divided into completely isolated human species that never interacted. It was a world of contact. Ancient DNA later revealed another mysterious group known as the Denisovans. Unlike Neanderthals, Denisovans remain nearly invisible for most of scientific history because so few physical remains had been discovered. In fact, one of the first major Denisovan identifications came not from a complete skeleton, but from a small finger bone found in a Siberian cave. Genetic analysis revealed that the bone belonged to a distinct human population previously unknown to science. This was one of the most extraordinary moments in paleogenetics. Scientists had identified an entire branch of humanity, primarily through DNA rather than traditional fossils. Further research showed that Denisovan ancestry still exists in some modern populations today, especially among indigenous peoples in parts of Oceania and Southeast Asia. Once again, migration had created encounters that survived biologically long after memory disappeared. These discoveries forced scientists to rethink earlier assumptions about how ancient humans behaved. The old image of separate human groups existing independently became harder to defend. Instead, the prehistoric world appeared dynamic and interconnected. Different populations met repeatedly across thousands of years. Some encounters may have been hostile. Others may have involved trade, cooperation, or shared survival during difficult environmental periods. Ancient DNA cannot fully describe the emotional reality of those meetings, but it proves they happened. Human history was shaped not only by separation, but by contact between groups once thought entirely distinct. Migration itself also became more complex under this new understanding. Early researchers sometimes imagined waves of expansion as simple movements from one region into another. Ancient DNA instead revealed layers of migration occurring across long periods. Some populations moved into new territories and remained there for thousands of years before later migrations arrived. In certain regions, earlier groups were partially replaced. In others, populations blended together gradually. Human ancestry became less like a straight tree and more like a braided river, dividing and reconnecting across time. Even isolated regions often showed signs of ancient contact. Coastal travel likely played an important role in early migration. Some researchers believe small groups moved along shorelines using marine resources to survive, slowly expanding across southern Asia over generations. These coastal routes may have allowed humans to reach Australia surprisingly early in prehistory. Ancient DNA studies continue refining these timelines, but the broader pattern remains clear. Human beings repeatedly entered unfamiliar environments and adapted with remarkable flexibility. Some populations learned to survive in frozen northern climates. Others adapted to tropical forests, mountains, deserts, or island chains separated by dangerous seas. Each migration altered the genetic landscape of future generations. Yet the deeper ancient DNA explored these movements, the more difficult it became to define any population as completely separate or permanent. Human groups formed, mixed, shifted, and sometimes vanished. Boundaries changed constantly. What modern societies often describe as ancient identities may actually rest upon many older migrations hidden beneath the surface of recorded history. The people walking through the Ice Age world could not know their descendants would one day analyze fragments of their bones in laboratories. They could not imagine that traces of their journeys, encounters, and relationships would survive inside billions of living bodies thousands of years later. But ancient DNA revealed that even when names, languages, and memories disappear, movement itself leaves marks that time does not fully erase. Modern people often inherit the idea that ancestry belongs to a single place. A homeland appears on maps, a flag marks a territory. Cemeteries, monuments, and historical buildings create the feeling that a population has always existed where it lives today. Ancient DNA tells a quieter and more complicated story. Beneath nearly every modern society lies a deep history of arrivals, departures, mixtures, and forgotten migrations stretching far beyond written memory. The farther scientists look into the past, the harder it becomes to locate any permanent starting point where human identity remained unchanged for very long. Even populations that appear culturally ancient today are usually connected to many earlier movements hidden beneath the surface of history. This does not mean human attachment to place is false. End quote. People genuinely build identities around landscapes, rivers, mountains, and shared memory. But ancient DNA suggests those attachments often formed after long periods of migration rather than before them. A homeland may feel eternal to those living within it, while genetically it represents the outcome of countless earlier journeys. In many cases, the people who now consider themselves native to a region descend from multiple ancient populations who arrived there at different times under different circumstances. Some came during periods of warming climate. Others arrived while escaping drought, famine, conflict, or environmental collapse elsewhere. Over generations, these migrations became invisible as communities merged into new identities. Ancient DNA revealed this pattern repeatedly across the world. In Europe, for example, genetic evidence showed that prehistoric hunter-gatherers, early farmers from Anatolia, and later pastoralist groups from the Eurasian steppe all contributed substantially to later populations. None of these groups remained completely isolated from the others forever. Similar stories emerged across Asia, where migrations expanded across grasslands, river valleys, and coastlines for thousands of years. In Africa, ancient DNA studies revealed movements and interactions between populations far more intricate than earlier historical models suggested. The Americas also carried evidence of multiple migration waves and regional adaptations unfolding over enormous timescales. Humanity's past increasingly resembled layers of overlapping movement rather than fixed civilizations standing apart. Geography itself contributed to this constant reshaping. During the Ice Ages, lower sea levels exposed land now buried beneath oceans. Humans crossed territories that no longer exist on modern maps. Later, rising waters isolated populations from one another, creating islands and coastlines very different from those ancient travelers once knew. Forests spread into some regions while deserts consumed others. Entire migration routes disappeared beneath changing climates. A place that supported human life for centuries could eventually become uninhabitable, forcing populations outward again. Ancient humans did not possess permanent security. Survival often depended on flexibility. Ancient DNA also challenged the emotional simplicity of origin stories. Many societies prefer narratives of continuity because continuity provides stability. It is comforting to imagine ancestors remaining unchanged across time, rooted in one place with clear boundaries separating them from outsiders. Yet human history rarely followed such clean divisions. Migration blurred boundaries repeatedly. People adopted new languages, intermarried with neighboring populations, absorbed customs from distant groups, and adapted to unfamiliar environments. Sometimes newcomers became dominant populations. Sometimes they blended gradually into existing communities. Sometimes both groups disappeared into entirely new identities centuries later. Human history became difficult to divide into pure beginnings and endings. This realization carried consequences beyond archaeology. Ancient DNA weakened the idea that ancestry could ever be entirely separate from movement and exchange. Even isolated populations often contained traces of older migrations preserved inside their genomes. Some genetic lineages traveled enormous distances across generations without leaving obvious historical records behind. A person living in one part of the world today may unknowingly carry biological connections to ancient peoples who crossed mountains, deserts, or coastlines thousands of years before recorded history began. The human body quietly preserves evidence of journeys memory can no longer describe. Yet ancient DNA also revealed how fragile these connections remain. Many ancient populations vanished completely, leaving only faint traces behind. Some contributed little or no ancestry to modern groups. Others survived genetically while losing their languages, names, and cultural identities forever. History remembered only fragments. Entire worlds disappeared silently. This tension between survival and disappearance sits at the center of humanity's ancient migrations. Every movement created new futures while also erasing older ones. The people crossing prehistoric landscapes could not know which parts of their identity would survive across millennia and which would dissolve into silence. They simply continued moving through changing climates and uncertain terrain because movement itself had become part of human existence. Ancient DNA revealed that the story of humanity was never truly about remaining in one place. It was about adaptation through continual motion across a world that never stopped changing beneath human feet. One of the strangest discoveries in ancient DNA research is that some human populations were identified before scientists even knew who those people were. In traditional archaeology, researchers usually begin with physical evidence. A burial site is excavated. Tools, ornaments, buildings, or written records reveal clues about the culture connected to the remains. Ancient DNA sometimes reversed that process entirely. Genetic patterns appeared first, while the people behind them remained invisible. Scientists began finding evidence of ancestors who had left almost no recognizable trace in conventional history. These became known informally as ghost populations, groups of humans whose existence could be detected genetically even when almost everything else about them had disappeared. The term sounds mysterious, but the reality is deeply human. Throughout history, countless populations vanished through migration. Famine, disease, climate shifts, warfare, or gradual absorption into neighboring groups. Most left behind little more than scattered bones and broken tools. Some disappeared so completely that no surviving culture remembered their names. Yet ancient DNA revealed that disappearance is often incomplete. A population may vanish culturally while fragments of its ancestry continue surviving inside later generations. In this way, the dead sometimes remain present biologically long after memory erases them. Scientists first noticed these hidden populations while comparing ancient and modern genomes across different regions. Certain genetic signatures appeared repeatedly but did not match any known ancient group already identified through archaeology. This suggested that additional populations once existed and contributed ancestry to later humans, even though little direct evidence of them survived. In some cases, researchers reconstructed parts of these lost populations mathematically by studying how modern genomes combined older ancestral components. The people themselves remained unnamed, but their influence could still be measured. It was as if shadows of forgotten migrations continued moving quietly through human DNA thousands of years later. Europe provided some early examples of this pattern. Ancient DNA studies revealed that prehistoric Europeans descended from multiple ancestral populations interacting across different eras. Some hunter-gatherer groups contributed ancestry to later farming societies. Steppe pastoralists later added new genetic layers. Yet beneath these major movements, scientists also detected traces of smaller or poorly understood populations that had once existed in certain regions before fading from visible history. Similar discoveries emerged elsewhere. In parts of Asia, researchers identified evidence of ancient groups that no written tradition preserved. In Africa, where human genetic diversity is especially deep and ancient, scientists found signs of multiple archaic and previously unknown ancestral lineages contributing to modern populations. These discoveries changed the meaning of historical absence. Traditionally, a people without monuments, writing, or surviving descendants could appear erased from history entirely. Ancient DNA revealed that biological memory often survives longer than cultural memory. Some ghost populations may never be fully identified because their physical remains have not survived or have not yet been discovered. Others may remain hidden simply because ancient DNA preservation is uneven across climates. Warm and humid regions destroy genetic material rapidly, leaving major gaps in the record. What scientists currently know about ghost populations likely represents only a fraction of the ancient human diversity that once existed. This uncertainty matters because it reminds researchers how incomplete the human story still remains. Every new genome has the potential to reveal another forgotten branch of humanity. The emotional effect of these discoveries is difficult to ignore. Entire populations lived, loved, raised children, adapted to landscapes, survived winters, buried their dead, and vanished before recorded history began. Most never imagined their existence would disappear so completely that future humans would need genetic analysis to rediscover them. Yet fragments of their lives endure quietly inside modern bodies. A person alive today may carry ancestry from groups that left no surviving language, architecture, or myth behind. The only evidence they ever existed may rest inside cells, passed across thousands of generations. Ancient DNA also revealed that human survival rarely follows simple lines. Populations sometimes disappeared not because every individual died, but because identities dissolved gradually into neighboring groups. Languages changed, customs blended, new communities formed from older mixtures. Over centuries, the original group stopped existing as a separate people, even though many descendants remained alive. History often records nations and civilizations as if they possess clear beginnings and endings. Ancient DNA suggests reality was usually more fluid. Human populations merged and transformed constantly beneath the surface of visible history. The deeper scientists search into ancient genomes, the more humanity's past begins to resemble a landscape filled with forgotten presences. Beneath every modern population stand countless ancestors whose names are lost forever. Some were absorbed into later migrations. Some vanished during environmental collapse. Some may have disappeared so long ago that only scattered genetic echoes remain. Ancient DNA cannot restore their voices completely, but it reveals something powerful nonetheless. The human story was shaped not only by the civilizations remembered in history books, but also by invisible peoples whose existence nearly vanished from the earth without witness. Reconstructing a ghost population is unlike discovering a lost city or translating an ancient language. There is often no dramatic moment where archaeologists uncover a complete civilization hidden beneath the ground. Instead, the process begins quietly inside laboratories, where scientists compare patterns buried within fragmented genomes. A few unusual sequences appear inside one ancient skeleton. Similar fragments emerge in another population thousands of miles away. Statistical models begin suggesting that neither group fully explains the genetic picture alone. Somewhere in the distant past, another population must have existed, one not yet directly identified through fossils or artifacts. This realization transformed ancient DNA research into something almost archaeological in reverse. Instead of beginning with visible remains and asking who these people were, scientists sometimes began with invisible ancestry and asked whether the people themselves had ever been found at all. The evidence often appears indirectly. Researchers compare genomes from both ancient and modern humans, searching for shared segments inherited from older ancestors. When known populations fail to account for all the observed patterns, the missing ancestry points toward additional groups that once contributed genetically to later humans. In some cases, scientists can estimate when these populations separated from others and approximately when they mixed into later communities. Yet the people themselves remain largely hidden. Their settlements may never have survived. Their bones may still lie undiscovered beneath forests, deserts, or ocean floors. Some ghost populations are known only through mathematical traces, left inside descendants who no longer remember them. This process requires extraordinary caution because ancient DNA is incomplete by nature. Every recovered genome contains damage, gaps, and uncertainty. Researchers cannot simply read the past like a finished book. They assemble probabilities from fragments. A single ancient skeleton rarely tells the whole story of a population. Human groups were diverse even within the same region and time period. Scientists therefore analyze many genomes together, comparing relationships across centuries and continents. As more data accumulates, hidden ancestral patterns gradually become clearer. What once looked like random variation sometimes reveals evidence of entirely forgotten migrations. Africa presents one of the most important examples of this complexity. Because modern humans originated there, African populations contain the deepest and most diverse human genetic lineages on Earth. Ancient DNA research in Africa remains challenging due to warm climates that rapidly destroy genetic material, but even limited evidence has revealed signs of ancient population structures far older and more intricate than earlier theories assumed. Some studies suggest that multiple deeply separated human groups interacted within Africa long before migration spread outward into Eurasia. There may have been ancient populations whose existence lasted tens of thousands of years without leaving obvious archaeological distinctions recognizable today. Their biological legacy survives more clearly than their cultural identity. Similar mysteries appear elsewhere. In parts of Southeast Asia and Oceania, genetic studies uncovered evidence that some modern populations inherited ancestry from deeply ancient human groups not yet fully identified. The Denisovans themselves remained unknown until genetic analysis exposed their existence. Scientists now suspect there may have been multiple Denisovan-related populations spread across Asia rather than a single isolated group. The prehistoric human world may have contained far more diversity than surviving fossils alone suggest. Ancient DNA repeatedly hints that humanity's family tree was once crowded with branches now mostly erased by time. Yet even the word erased can be misleading. Ghost populations remind scientists that disappearance is rarely absolute. Biological inheritance can survive long after every visible sign of a people vanishes. A language may die. Religious traditions may disappear. Cities may collapse into dust. But descendants continue carrying pieces of ancient ancestry forward, often unknowingly. In this way, modern humans function as living records of countless forgotten encounters stretching deep into prehistory. Every genome contains echoes from populations that no longer exist independently. The emotional distance between the present and the ancient past becomes smaller under this perspective. A person living today is not merely connected to famous civilizations preserved in textbooks. They are also connected to unnamed communities who left behind no monuments at all. Ancient DNA expanded history beyond kings, empires, and written archives. It revealed that ordinary human survival, migration, family, adaptation, and reproduction carried the deepest continuity across time. The most powerful ancestors in human history may not be those whose names survived, but those whose existence almost disappeared completely. As scientists continue recovering ancient genomes from caves, graves, and forgotten landscapes, more ghost populations will likely emerge from silence. Some may alter current theories of migration entirely. Others may reveal connections between regions once thought unrelated. Each discovery carries the same quiet implication. Human history is still incomplete. Beneath the known story lies another older world filled with populations that shaped humanity, even though memory forgot them long ago. History usually defines disappearance in visible terms. A civilization falls, a language stops being spoken, a kingdom loses its territory and fades from records. Archaeologists uncover abandoned settlements and describe the people who once lived there as gone. Ancient DNA complicated this idea of disappearance because it revealed that populations often survive biologically long after they vanish culturally. A people may lose its name, traditions, and collective identity, while still continuing quietly through descendants who no longer remember where parts of their ancestry came from. In this sense, extinction is sometimes less complete than history once assumed. Human beings carry fragments of forgotten worlds inside them. This realization changes the emotional meaning of ancestry. Earlier generations often imagined lineage as a clear line extending backward through known relatives into familiar cultural identities. Ancient DNA suggests that most lineages are layered mixtures formed through countless encounters no family story could fully preserve. Somewhere in the distant past, two strangers from entirely different populations met under circumstances nobody alive can reconstruct now. Their descendants continued through centuries of migration and adaptation until eventually those ancient identities dissolved into newer ones. Yet traces remained. Tiny fragments of DNA crossed immense stretches of time, surviving wars, climate shifts, epidemics, and collapsing civilizations. Modern humans therefore carry inherited memories without conscious awareness of them. Not memories in the emotional sense, but biological continuity stretching far beyond recorded history. This continuity does not preserve culture perfectly. Ancient DNA cannot recover forgotten languages or beliefs. It cannot fully explain how people understood themselves while they were alive. A ghost population may survive genetically while everything that once made it culturally distinct disappears forever. This creates a strange tension between biological survival and historical silence. Scientists may identify that an unknown population contributed ancestry to modern humans thousands of years ago, while knowing almost nothing else about them. No names survive, no myths remain. Sometimes even their appearance is uncertain, yet descendants continue living across the world today. Ancient DNA revealed that much of humanity's survival occurred through absorption rather than permanence. Smaller populations often blended into larger neighboring groups over generations. Children inherited ancestry from both sides, gradually dissolving the boundaries that once separated communities. This process happened repeatedly across history. Some groups disappeared because they were conquered or displaced. Others faded through trade, intermarriage, and migration so gradual that no clear ending existed. Human identity shifted continuously across time. The deeper researchers look into the genetic past, the harder it becomes to define exactly where one people ended and another began. Even famous civilizations were not genetically fixed entities. Empires expanded through movement and mixture. Trade routes connected distant populations long before modern transportation existed. Travelers carried genes alongside languages, technologies, and beliefs. Ancient DNA revealed that human populations were rarely as isolated as later political narratives sometimes claimed. Beneath the surface of national histories lies a much older pattern of connection and blending stretching across continents. This does not erase cultural differences, but it places them within a larger story of shared ancestry and continual movement. Ghost populations also reveal how fragile historical memory truly is. Entire peoples disappeared so completely that only advanced genetic analysis exposed their existence. Without ancient DNA, humanity would never know some of these populations existed at all. This suggests that the historical record preserved only a small fraction of ancient human diversity. Countless communities likely vanished without leaving recoverable traces. Their stories ended before writing, monuments, or durable architecture could preserve them. The silence surrounding them lasted thousands of years, yet fragments of their existence endured invisibly inside later generations until science learned how to detect them. There is something deeply humbling in this discovery. Modern humans often organize identity around recent history nations, ethnic groups, languages, religions, and political borders. Ancient DNA stretches the timeline far beyond those categories. It reveals that every person alive today descends from an almost unimaginable number of forgotten ancestors, most of whom left no surviving record of their lives. Some crossed landscapes that no longer exist. Some belong to populations history forgot completely. Some may have disappeared before the first cities were ever built. Yet without them, the modern world would not exist. Their survival became hidden inside future humanity itself. The ancient bones recovered from caves and graves therefore tell two stories at once. One story is about disappearance. Cultures vanished, identities dissolved, names were erased by time. The other story is about persistence. Human connection continued even when memory failed. Ghost populations prove that history is not only preserved through monuments or written records, sometimes it survives silently inside living bodies, waiting thousands of years before anyone realizes it was there at all. For a long time, Neanderthals existed in popular imagination as symbols of failure. They were often described as primitive cave dwellers, overwhelmed by the intelligence and adaptability of modern humans. Museums portrayed them with heavy brows, rough features, and animal skins, as if they belonged to a separate world standing outside true humanity. This image shaped public thinking for generations. Yet ancient DNA, along with decades of archaeological research, slowly transformed that picture into something far more complex and unsettling. Neanderthals were not monsters waiting at the edge of civilization. They were human relatives who survived across Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans spread widely through those same landscapes. Long before Homo sapiens entered Ice Age Europe, Neanderthals had already adapted to its brutal climates. They hunted large animals, controlled fire, crafted tools, and survived winters that could kill unprepared populations within days. Their bodies reflected these harsh conditions. Neanderthals were generally shorter and more heavily built than modern humans, with broad chests and strong limbs that helped conserve heat in cold environments. They lived in small communities, likely caring for injured members and sharing resources for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests they created tools with considerable skill and may have used pigments, ornaments, and symbolic objects in certain regions. None of this fits the older image of unintelligent creatures incapable of culture or emotional depth. Ancient DNA deepened this transformation by revealing something even more significant. Neanderthals were not completely separate from modern humans. They became part of us. Around 60,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens expanding outward from Africa entered regions where Neanderthals already lived. At some point during these encounters, the two populations interbred. The evidence now exists inside millions of living people. Most modern humans outside Africa carry approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry in their genomes. This may sound small, but across the entire human population, it represents a vast biological inheritance passed through thousands of generations. The discovery shocked the scientific world when it became widely accepted in the early 21st century. Earlier theories often assumed modern humans had completely replaced Neanderthals without meaningful biological mixing. Ancient DNA proved otherwise. The boundaries between these human groups had been more permeable than scientists once imagined. This raised difficult questions about how Neanderthals and modern humans understood one another. Ancient DNA cannot reveal emotions, conversations, or social structures. It cannot explain whether encounters were peaceful, violent, temporary, or long-lasting. Yet interbreeding means some relationships formed closely enough for children to be born and survive. These children then became ancestors. Somewhere in the Ice Age world, humans who may have appeared physically different still recognized one another as part of the same living reality. Their descendants continue carrying traces of those encounters today. Neanderthal ancestry is not distributed evenly across all populations. People with European and Asian ancestry generally carry more Neanderthal DNA, than populations whose ancestors remained primarily within Africa after the initial migrations. Researchers also discovered that certain Neanderthal genes may have helped modern humans adapt to unfamiliar climates, immune challenges, and environmental conditions outside Africa. Some inherited variants appear connected to skin biology, immune responses, and other physical traits. In this way, Neanderthal ancestry was not merely absorbed passively into modern humans. Some of it may have provided survival advantages during migrations into colder Eurasian environments, yet much about these interactions remains uncertain. Scientists still debate how frequently interbreeding occurred and over what timescales. Some Neanderthal genetic variants disappeared over time, likely because they were disadvantageous in later populations. Others persisted across thousands of years. Ancient DNA revealed a complicated biological exchange rather than a simple merger. At the same time, Neanderthals themselves gradually disappeared as a distinct population around 40,000 years ago. The reasons remain debated. Climate instability, competition for resources, low population numbers, disease, and absorption into expanding Homo sapiens populations may all have contributed. Ancient DNA suggests Neanderthal communities were already relatively small and genetically vulnerable before their final disappearance. Some groups may have become increasingly isolated as environments changed. Others may have blended partially into incoming human populations before vanishing as separate identities. Their extinction was likely not a single dramatic event, but a long fading across generations. What remains extraordinary is that Neanderthals were never entirely lost. For tens of thousands of years after their disappearance, humanity forgot the connection completely. Modern humans walked across Europe and Asia unaware that fragments of another ancient human lineage still existed within them. Ancient DNA restored that forgotten relationship. It revealed that human history was not the story of one perfect lineage advancing alone through time. It was a shared world where different kinds of humans met, struggled, adapted, and left lasting traces inside one another. Roughly 60,000 years ago, small groups of Homo sapiens began moving farther into Eurasia, entering landscapes already shaped by countless generations of Neanderthal survival. The world they encountered was cold, unstable, and dangerous. Vast grasslands stretched beneath glacial skies. Herds of mammoths, bison, and reindeer crossed frozen terrain, while predators moved through forests and valleys. Winters were long. Resources could disappear suddenly. Human populations remained small and scattered across enormous distances. In this environment, survival depended not only on intelligence, but on adaptability, cooperation, and knowledge passed carefully across generations. Neanderthals already possessed that knowledge. They had survived multiple ice age cycles long before modern humans arrived. Ancient DNA revealed that these two human groups did not exist in completely separate timelines. For thousands of years they shared parts of the same world. Archaeological evidence suggests their territories overlapped in regions of Europe and Western Asia. Sometimes they may have occupied nearby caves within relatively short periods of time. They hunted similar animals and used some comparable stone tool technologies, yet the exact nature of their encounters remains one of the great unanswered questions of human history. Ancient DNA confirms connection, but it cannot fully explain what those meetings felt like. A small band of Homo sapiens moving through unfamiliar valleys may have encountered Neanderthals suddenly near hunting grounds, rivers, or seasonal shelters. The differences between them were likely visible immediately. Neanderthals had broader bodies, distinctive skull shapes, and powerful physical builds shaped by cold climates. Modern humans were generally taller and more lightly built. Their languages, sounds, gestures, and social customs may have differed in ways impossible to reconstruct now. Yet despite those differences, they recognized one another as close enough biologically for reproduction to occur. This simple fact changed humanity's understanding of itself. Earlier generations often imagined human evolution as a clean sequence, where one superior group replaced another. Ancient DNA revealed something more complicated and more human. The boundaries between populations were not absolute. Relationships formed across them. Children survived across them. Some of those children eventually became ancestors to millions of people living today. This means the Ice Age world was not only a place of competition, it was also a place of contact. However limited or fragile that contact may have been, scientists still debate how often interbreeding occurred. Genetic evidence suggests it happened multiple times rather than during one isolated event. Different modern populations carry slightly different patterns of Neanderthal ancestry, implying repeated encounters as Homo sapiens spread through Eurasia. Some interactions may have been brief and localized. Others may have involved longer coexistence in overlapping territories. Ancient DNA also revealed hints of movement in the opposite direction. Evidence suggests that some modern human ancestry entered Neanderthal populations before their extinction. The relationship between these groups was therefore not entirely one-sided. Yet the coexistence did not last forever. Over thousands of years, Neanderthal populations declined and eventually disappeared as distinct communities. The reasons remain uncertain because extinction rarely follows a single cause. Climate fluctuations repeatedly transformed Ice Age environments, affecting animal migrations and food availability. Small populations faced greater risks from disease, environmental stress, and genetic isolation. Homo sapiens may have possessed advantages in larger social networks or long-distance exchange systems that improved survival during difficult periods. Competition for territory and resources likely occurred as well. Ancient DNA alone cannot separate these pressures neatly. What it does reveal is that Neanderthal disappearance unfolded gradually, not as one sudden catastrophic event. Some groups may have survived longer in isolated refuges, while others blended partially into expanding Homo sapiens populations. This gradual fading creates one of the strangest emotional realities in human history. Neanderthals disappeared as a recognizable people, but they did not vanish completely. Tiny portions of them continued forward inside the descendants of modern humans. Across tens of thousands of years, those inherited fragments survived migrations, civilizations, wars, and technological revolutions. Long after humans forgot Neanderthals existed, their genetic traces remained quietly present. Ancient DNA restored this hidden connection only recently. The discovery forced humanity to reconsider what extinction really means. In many ways, the story of Neanderthals reflects the larger pattern ancient DNA keeps revealing. Human history was not built from isolated populations moving separately through time. It emerged from encounters between groups sharing landscapes, adapting to changing climates, and influencing one another biologically and culturally. The Ice Age world contained multiple forms of humanity existing together under the same cold skies. Some survived as distinct populations, others disappeared into silence, but the boundaries between them were never as complete as later generations imagined. Beneath modern human identity lies evidence of ancient meetings, so distant in time that no memory of them survived, only fragments carried invisibly within the human body itself. For centuries, humanity imagined the distant past as relatively simple. There were ancient humans, and eventually there were modern humans. The story appeared linear, almost clean. Ancient DNA shattered that simplicity. Neanderthals were only the beginning. As scientists continued extracting genetic material from ancient remains, they discovered evidence for another human population that had remained almost completely invisible to history. Unlike Neanderthals, this group was not first recognized through famous skeletons or dramatic archaeological discoveries. It emerged from a tiny fragment of bone hidden inside a cave in Siberia. In 2008, researchers excavating Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains uncovered a small finger bone belonging to a young female who had lived tens of thousands of years earlier. At first glance, the fragment seemed unremarkable, yet when scientists analyzed its DNA, they realized it did not belong to either modern humans or Neanderthals. The genetic patterns pointed toward a distinct human lineage previously unknown to science. The population became known as the Denisovans, named after the cave where the discovery occurred. This moment changed the understanding of prehistoric humanity almost immediately. An entire branch of human existence had been discovered primarily through genetics rather than traditional archaeology. The implications were enormous. If one major human population could remain hidden until ancient DNA exposed it, how many others might still be unknown? Denisovans remain mysterious even today because physical evidence connected to them is extremely limited. Scientists possess only a small number of fossils confidently identified as Denisovan, including fragments of bone, teeth, and part of a jawbone discovered in Tibet. Yet despite this scarcity, their genetic legacy survives clearly in modern populations. Ancient DNA revealed that Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens, much like Neanderthals did. Some modern human groups, particularly indigenous populations in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Southeast Asia, carry notable percentages of Denisovan ancestry. In certain populations, this ancestry reaches levels far higher than Neanderthal contributions found elsewhere. Once again, ancient humanity appeared interconnected rather than isolated. The Denisovans also revealed how adaptable ancient human populations could become. One famous example involves high-altitude adaptation among Tibetan populations. Researchers identified a gene variant connected to surviving in low-oxygen environments at extreme elevations. Genetic evidence suggests this adaptation may have entered modern humans through Denisovan ancestry thousands of years ago. In this way, ancient encounters between different human groups may have directly shaped how later populations survived in challenging environments. Ancient DNA transformed interbreeding from a historical curiosity into an important force influencing human adaptation itself. Yet the Denisovans also deepened the mystery surrounding prehistoric humanity. Scientists now suspect that Denisovans were not a single small isolated group confined to Siberia. Genetic evidence hints at multiple Denisovan-related populations spread across large parts of Asia over long periods of time. Some may have adapted to cold northern climates, while others lived in tropical regions farther south. The prehistoric human world may have contained far more diversity than surviving fossils currently reveal. Ancient DNA keeps suggesting that humanity once existed as a network of overlapping populations rather than one dominant lineage moving alone through time. This realization altered how scientists understand human evolution. Earlier models often resembled branching trees with separate species dividing neatly from one another. Ancient DNA revealed something more tangled. 19WW Dud. Different human populations separated, reconnected, interbred, and diverged again across enormous timescales. The boundaries between groups were often incomplete. Human evolution resembled a braided system of relationships unfolding gradually across continents. Even the idea of extinction became more uncertain under this framework. Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared as distinct populations, yet parts of them continued surviving inside Homo sapiens. Their biological influence did not end when their communities vanished. Modern humans carry evidence of those ancient connections within their cells. In this sense, humanity today is not entirely separate from the older human world that existed during the Ice Age. We are partly shaped by it. The emotional weight of this discovery is difficult to escape. Tens of thousands of years ago, different forms of humans shared the earth together. They crossed the same valleys, watched the same fires, endured the same winters, and adapted to the same shifting climates. Some populations vanished completely, others survived through mixture and inheritance. For most of recorded history, modern humans forgot this shared existence entirely. Ancient DNA restored it piece by piece from fragments buried in caves and frozen ground. The deeper scientists search, the more the ancient world expands beyond familiar history. Humanity's past no longer appears singular or isolated. It appears crowded with forgotten relatives whose traces still survive quietly within us. And if entire branches of humanity remained hidden until a few decades ago, it raises a difficult possibility. The story of human origins may still be far larger and far less complete than anyone living today fully understands. For most of human history, people lived by moving through the landscape rather than controlling it. Small communities hunted animals, gathered plants, followed seasonal cycles, and adapted constantly to changing environments. This way of life lasted for tens of thousands of years. Then, gradually, something began to change. In several parts of the world, humans started cultivating plants, domesticating animals, and building more permanent settlements. The transformation unfolded slowly across generations, but its consequences would reshape humanity more deeply than almost any earlier migration. Ancient DNA later revealed that this agricultural revolution did not spread only through ideas. It also spread through people themselves. One of the earliest and most influential centers of agriculture emerged in a region often called the Fertile Crescent, stretching across parts of the modern Middle East roughly 12,000 years ago. Communities there gradually domesticated wheat, barley, goats, sheep, and other species that became foundations of settled life. Farming allowed populations to grow more densely because food production could support larger communities than hunting and gathering alone. Villages expanded, permanent houses appeared, storage systems for grain developed. Over time, farming societies became increasingly capable of supporting larger populations across stable territories. For a long time, historians debated how agriculture spread into surrounding regions. One theory suggested local hunter-gatherers simply adopted farming techniques from neighbors while remaining largely the same populations biologically. Another possibility proposed that actual farming communities migrated outward, bringing both their crops and their ancestry into new lands. Ancient DNA showed that the second process played a major role in many regions. In Europe, the evidence became especially clear. Genetic studies of ancient skeletons revealed that early European farmers were not simply local hunter-gatherers who learned agriculture independently. Many descended substantially from farming populations that originated in Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. Beginning around 8,000 years ago, these farming communities gradually expanded into southeastern Europe and then farther across the continent over many centuries. They carried seeds, domesticated animals, tools, and a different way of living. Yet they also carried their genes. Ancient DNA demonstrated that agriculture spread partly because populations themselves moved. This migration reshaped Europe profoundly. Before farming arrived, Europe was inhabited mainly by hunter-gatherer populations descended from earlier Ice Age groups. Ancient DNA showed that the first farmers were genetically distinct from many of these hunter-gatherers. Over time, the two populations interacted, intermarried, and blended. Some regions experienced stronger continuity with local hunter-gatherers, while others underwent more dramatic demographic change. The process varied across landscapes and centuries, but the overall pattern remained unmistakable. Farming was not merely a technology passing between separate peoples. It involved the movement and mixing of human populations on a continental scale. This discovery transformed how scientists understood cultural change. Earlier archaeology sometimes described the spread of agriculture mainly as an exchange of ideas. Ancient DNA revealed that human migration was often inseparable from cultural transformation itself. Languages, traditions, and technologies traveled alongside families, children, and entire communities. The ancient world became less static and more dynamic than earlier historical models suggested. Similar patterns emerged outside Europe as well. In East Asia, Africa, and other regions, agriculture spread through combinations of migration, adaptation, and interaction between local populations and incoming farming groups. The details differed from place to place, but ancient DNA repeatedly showed that population movement played a central role in shaping agricultural societies. Farming also altered the human relationship with land. Hunter-gatherers had often moved seasonally through large territories. Farmers became more tied to specific fields, rivers, and settlements. Villages developed into towns. Population densities increased. Property, inheritance, and social hierarchies grew more complex over time. Ancient DNA revealed that these changes created new patterns of ancestry, as communities became larger and more interconnected. At the same time, diseases spread more easily among dense populations living close to domesticated animals. Human biology itself continued adapting to these new conditions across generations. Yet the agricultural revolution did not erase earlier populations completely. Hunter-gatherer ancestry survived within later farming societies through gradual mixture. Once again, ancient DNA revealed humanity's tendency toward blending rather than total replacement. The people who built early agricultural civilizations often carried ancestry from multiple older worlds combined together. Beneath the first farms and villages remained traces of ancient migration stretching far deeper into prehistory. The spread of agriculture therefore became more than a story about food production. It became another chapter in humanity's long pattern of movement, mixture, and transformation. Ancient DNA showed that even one of civilization's greatest turning points emerged not from isolated populations developing separately, but from repeated encounters between different human communities crossing the same landscapes over time. As farming communities expanded across ancient landscapes, they did more than introduce new crops and technologies. They changed the demographic structure of entire regions. Ancient DNA revealed that in many places, the arrival of agriculture coincided with major shifts in ancestry that unfolded over centuries. Earlier populations did not always disappear suddenly, but the balance between groups changed steadily as farming societies grew larger and more widespread. The result was one of the most significant population transformations in human history. Europe became one of the clearest examples because thousands of ancient genomes from different time periods allowed scientists to track these changes in remarkable detail. Before farming spread into Europe, most people belonged to hunter-gatherer populations whose ancestors had survived the Ice Age there for thousands of years. These groups lived in relatively small communities, moving seasonally through forests, rivers, and coastal regions. Their population densities remained low compared to later agricultural societies. When farming populations began arriving from Anatolia roughly 8,000 years ago, the genetic landscape started to shift. Ancient DNA showed that early farmers expanded rapidly across southeastern Europe and then deeper into the continent. In many areas, their ancestry became dominant within a few thousand years. This process did not occur because farming communities were necessarily more advanced in every sense, but because agriculture supported much larger populations. A farming village could often produce more reliable food supplies than hunting and gathering alone, allowing more children to survive into adulthood. Over generations, even gradual population growth created enormous demographic advantages. Farming communities spread outward continuously, establishing new settlements and expanding into territories previously occupied by smaller hunter-gatherer groups. Yet the process was not identical everywhere. In some regions, ancient DNA suggests substantial mixing between farmers and local hunter-gatherers. In others, incoming populations appear to have replaced much of the earlier ancestry more dramatically. Britain provides one striking example. Genetic evidence indicates that when farming arrived there roughly 6,000 years ago, the ancestry associated with local hunter-gatherers declined sharply within a relatively short period of time. The reasons remain debated. Disease, demographic pressure, cultural attraction to farming life, and unequal access to resources may all have contributed. Ancient DNA rarely explains exactly how these transitions felt for the people living through them. It reveals patterns of ancestry, but not every emotional or social detail behind the change. Similar transformations appeared outside Europe as well. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the expansion of farming and ironworking communities known broadly through the Bantu migrations reshaped large regions over thousands of years. Ancient DNA and linguistic evidence together suggest that populations speaking Bantu languages expanded gradually across Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, interacting with and absorbing many local hunter-gatherer groups along the way. Again, the process involved both movement and mixture rather than a simple replacement narrative. In East Asia, farming populations connected to early rice and millet agriculture also expanded and interacted with neighbouring groups across broad territories. These repeated patterns revealed something important about human history. Major cultural shifts were often inseparable from population movement itself. Ancient DNA forced historians to reconsider how civilizations spread. Ideas alone do not reproduce biologically. Human beings carry culture through family structures, migration, childbirth, and long-term settlement. Farming transformed not only landscapes, but the ancestry of future generations. This created another challenge for traditional ideas about identity. Many modern populations feel ancient and continuous, because their languages, traditions, or historical records extend deeply into the past. Ancient DNA showed that beneath this continuity often lies a far more layered biological history. A region may preserve one cultural identity, while genetically reflecting several older migrations combined together. The people living there today may descend partly from hunter-gatherers, partly from early farmers, and partly from later migrants who arrived centuries afterward. Human ancestry became increasingly difficult to reduce into simple categories. At the same time, agriculture intensified humanity's influence over the environment. Forests were cleared, animal populations changed, permanent settlements expanded into larger networks connected through trade and exchange. Population density increased disease transmission, leading to new evolutionary pressures on the human body. Ancient DNA revealed adaptations linked to diet, immunity, and metabolism emerging within agricultural populations over time. One example involved lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk into adulthood, which became more common in certain pastoralist societies after dairy farming spread. Human biology continued evolving alongside cultural change. Yet beneath these transformations, Ancient DNA also preserved evidence of survival from older worlds. Hunter-gatherer ancestry never vanished completely from Europe or many other regions. It remained present through mixture and inheritance. The same pattern repeated across human history. New populations arrived, but older ones often survived partially inside them. Civilizations changed names, languages, and technologies, yet biological continuity flowed beneath the surface through countless generations. The agricultural revolution, therefore, did not create a clean break between ancient and modern humanity. It added another layer to the long human story of migration, blending, adaptation, and survival across time. The agricultural revolution did not simply change how humans obtained food. Over thousands of years, it changed the human body itself. Ancient DNA revealed that the transition from hunting and gathering to farming created new biological pressures unlike anything earlier humans had experienced. Diets shifted. Disease patterns changed. Populations became denser and more sedentary. Human beings began evolving within environments they had partially created for themselves. This marked a profound turning point in the relationship between culture and biology. Hunter-gatherer populations had survived through diverse diets that varied with seasons and geography. They consumed combinations of wild plants, nuts, fruits, fish, and hunted animals depending on local ecosystems. Farming narrowed that diversity in many places. Early agricultural societies often depended heavily on a smaller number of staple crops such as wheat, rice, maize, or barley. These foods supported larger populations, but they also altered nutrition and daily life. Archaeological evidence suggests some early farmers were physically shorter and experienced more signs of malnutrition or disease compared to certain earlier hunter-gatherer groups. Permanent settlements also exposed people to new health risks. Waste accumulated more easily. Domesticated animals lived near humans, increasing opportunities for diseases to cross between species. Ancient DNA helped scientists trace some of these long biological adjustments across generations. One of the clearest examples involves lactose tolerance. Most mammals lose the ability to digest lactose, the sugar found in milk, after infancy. Early human populations likely followed the same pattern. Yet in some agricultural and pastoral societies, genetic mutations allowing adults to digest milk became increasingly common over time. Ancient DNA revealed that these mutations spread relatively recently in human history, especially among populations that relied heavily on cattle or dairy farming. In parts of Europe and certain regions of Africa and the Middle East, the ability to consume milk into adulthood provided nutritional advantages during periods of food stress. Over generations, natural selection increased the frequency of these genetic traits. This process demonstrated something remarkable. Human culture had created new environments, and human biology responded by evolving within them. Similar patterns appeared in immune systems. Dense agricultural populations allowed infectious diseases to spread more rapidly than among smaller mobile hunter-gatherer groups. Ancient DNA studies identified genetic changes connected to immune responses that became more common after the rise of farming societies. Some adaptations may have improved resistance to diseases spreading through crowded settlements or close contact with domesticated animals. Yet these same changes sometimes carried later consequences. Certain immune system variants beneficial in ancient environments may now influence modern risks for autoimmune disorders or inflammatory diseases. The human body still carries evolutionary responses shaped by agricultural life thousands of years ago. Ancient DNA also revealed how migration and farming interacted together biologically. As farming populations expanded into new environments, they encountered unfamiliar climates, pathogens, and diets. Interbreeding between incoming farmers and local populations combined different genetic adaptations accumulated over long periods in separate regions. Human survival often depended not on one population replacing another completely, but on mixtures that allowed useful traits to spread across communities. Ancient DNA repeatedly showed that blending between populations played a major role in shaping human adaptability. Agriculture also transformed social structures in ways that indirectly influenced genetics. Larger settlements created more complex hierarchies, trade networks, and patterns of inheritance. Wealth and resources became unevenly distributed in many early societies. Some families had greater reproductive success than others, gradually influencing population genetics over long timescales. Human evolution no longer depended solely on climate or predators. Increasingly, Humans became evolutionary forces acting upon themselves through culture, economics, and social organization. Yet even while societies changed dramatically, ancient DNA revealed continuity beneath the transformation. The rise of agriculture did not erase the deep human past. Modern populations still carry ancestry from ancient hunter-gatherers alongside later farming groups and subsequent migrations. Beneath every major civilization lie older layers of human survival stretching back into prehistory. The farmers who built villages and domesticated crops remained connected biologically to ancestors who once crossed Ice Age landscapes, following migrating animals beneath open skies. Ancient DNA dissolved the illusion that civilization created an entirely new humanity, separate from what came before. Instead, it showed a long continuum of adaptation. Humans changed their environments, and those environments slowly changed humans in return. The agricultural revolution, therefore, became more than a technological achievement. It marked the beginning of a new kind of evolutionary relationship between culture and biology. Fields, animals, villages, and food storage systems altered the pressures shaping human survival. Over thousands of years, these changes entered the human genome itself. Ancient DNA revealed that the story of civilization is written not only in ruins and monuments, but inside the body. The modern human form carries traces of ancient diets, migrations, diseases, and survival strategies accumulated across countless generations. Even now, the human body remains partly shaped by decisions first made when early farmers planted seeds into the earth and chose, perhaps without realizing it, to live differently from every generation before them. Most human voices disappeared without leaving a single recorded word behind. Long before writing systems emerged, people spoke thousands of languages across forests, coastlines, mountains, and plains. Parents taught children how to name rivers, animals, seasons, and stars. Stories passed through memory alone. Entire cultures understood the world through sounds that vanished completely once the last speakers died. Today, historians can recover fragments of certain ancient languages from inscriptions, tablets, and manuscripts. But these surviving records represent only a tiny portion of humanity's linguistic past. Ancient DNA revealed something unsettling beneath this silence. Many populations disappeared so thoroughly that even their languages left no trace behind. Yet their biological descendants continued living inside later societies. For centuries, scholars often assumed that cultural continuity and biological continuity moved together. If a language disappeared, the people connected to it were imagined to have disappeared as well. Ancient DNA complicated this picture. Populations sometimes survived genetically while losing their original languages entirely. In other cases, languages spread widely, even where the underlying ancestry changed only partially. Human history turned out to be far less stable than traditional narratives suggested. Europe offers one striking example of this tension between genes and language. Before the spread of Indo-European languages across much of the continent, many different linguistic worlds likely existed there. Most vanished without written records. Ancient DNA revealed repeated migrations into Europe from farming communities and later from steppe pastoralist populations connected to the Yamnaya culture roughly 5,000 years ago. Linguistic evidence suggests these migrations may have helped spread early Indo-European languages, ancestors of many languages spoken across Europe and parts of Asia today. Yet the earlier populations did not vanish completely. Their ancestry remained present through mixture and inheritance, even as languages shifted over generations. This pattern repeated across human history. A language could disappear while the people carrying parts of its ancestry survived. Ancient DNA also exposed the fragility of cultural memory itself. Entire populations sometimes vanished from historical awareness, despite once occupying large territories. Without writing systems or durable monuments, many communities left behind little evidence beyond tools, burials, and genetic traces. Forests reclaimed settlements, rivers changed course, climate shifts erased migration routes. Over centuries, neighboring groups forgot earlier populations had ever existed. Yet ancient genomes preserved evidence of these forgotten peoples long after their identities dissolved. In some regions, researchers identified ancestry from populations no surviving language family could clearly explain. The people themselves had become almost completely invisible except through DNA. This discovery changed how scientists think about ancient identity. Language, culture, and ancestry do not always move together in simple ways. A population may adopt a new language through trade, migration, conquest, or social pressure, while remaining genetically continuous in many respects. Another group may preserve aspects of its ancestry while gradually absorbing foreign customs and beliefs over centuries. Ancient DNA revealed that human identity has always been layered and fluid rather than fixed permanently to one cultural form. Some of the most influential population movements in history may have occurred without leaving direct written records behind. The emotional weight of these disappearances is difficult to ignore. Every lost language once contained unique ways of describing reality. Some may have held words for landscapes, emotions, seasons, or spiritual ideas that no surviving language can fully reproduce. Entire systems of memory vanished when communities disappeared or merged into larger populations. Ancient DNA cannot restore those voices. It cannot recover forgotten songs or explain how ancient people understood existence. Yet it reveals that beneath modern societies lie countless erased worlds that once felt as real and permanent to their speakers as modern nations feel today. The deeper researchers study ancient genomes, the more incomplete written history begins to appear. Recorded civilizations represent only the surface layer of humanity's past. Beneath them existed thousands of communities whose names, languages, and identities dissolved before history preserved them. Ancient DNA acts almost like a faint echo from those lost worlds. It does not restore them fully, but it proves they were there. Modern humans, therefore, inherit more than famous civilizations and recorded empires. They also inherit biological connections to forgotten peoples whose stories ended before anyone thought to write them down. In this way, the silence surrounding ancient languages becomes part of the larger human story ancient DNA keeps uncovering. Humanity was shaped not only by the cultures history remembered, but also by countless communities erased from memory while still surviving invisibly inside future generations. The past is filled with voices no one can hear anymore, yet traces of the people who spoke them remain alive within the human family itself. One of the most surprising lessons from ancient DNA is that language and ancestry do not always travel together. For much of modern history, people often assumed that speaking the same language meant sharing the same deep origins. Nations were built around this idea. Linguistic identity became tied to bloodlines, territory, and collective memory. Yet ancient DNA revealed a far more fluid reality. Human populations repeatedly changed languages across history, while preserving large portions of their earlier ancestry. In other cases, small migrating groups spread languages across enormous territories without completely replacing the populations already living there. The connection between culture and genetics turned out to be real, but deeply complicated. Language can move faster than genes. A community may adopt a new language for trade, political survival, religion, or social advantage without experiencing major biological replacement. This process has happened repeatedly throughout history. Conquered populations often begin speaking the language of ruling elites within a few generations. Merchants adopt common trade languages to connect distant regions. Religious traditions spread sacred languages across populations with entirely different ancestries. Ancient DNA revealed that beneath these cultural shifts, much older genetic continuity often survives. Europe again provides an important example. Indo-European languages eventually spread across most of the continent, becoming ancestors of English, Spanish, Russian, Hindi, Persian, and many others. Linguists and geneticists both believe migrations from the Eurasian steppe played a major role in this process roughly 5,000 years ago. Ancient DNA confirmed significant population movement connected to these migrations. Yet the spread of Indo-European languages did not erase all earlier ancestry already present in Europe. The descendants of prehistoric hunter-gatherers and early farmers remained part of the population through mixture and survival. Over time, people speaking entirely new languages still carried ancestry from older communities whose original speech vanished completely. The language changed, the genes remained layered beneath it. Similar patterns appeared across many parts of the world. In North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and South America, populations often adopted new languages through conquest, trade networks, empire expansion, or religious transformation while retaining much of their earlier ancestry. Ancient DNA repeatedly showed that human identity cannot be reduced to one category alone. Language, culture, ancestry, and political identity each move according to different historical pressures. Sometimes they align closely, sometimes they separate dramatically. This realization changed how scientists interpret the ancient world. Earlier historical models sometimes imagined cultures as stable units, moving cleanly across maps. Ancient DNA revealed overlapping layers instead. A population may appear culturally transformed while remaining biologically continuous in many respects. Another population may experience large-scale migration while preserving certain local traditions. Human history became less like a sequence of isolated civilizations and more like a long process of adaptation and blending. Even the idea of ethnic permanence became difficult to define clearly across deep time. Ancient DNA also complicated older ideas about original peoples of specific regions. Many modern communities genuinely preserve ancient cultural roots, but the biological history beneath those identities often reflects numerous earlier migrations combined together. A population speaking one language today may descend from many ancient groups who once spoke entirely different languages now lost forever. This does not make modern identities meaningless. It simply reveals that human continuity operates through constant transformation rather than perfect stability. The emotional importance of language still remains powerful, because language shapes memory, belonging, and worldview. Yet ancient DNA reminds humanity that beneath every spoken language lies a deeper history stretching beyond recorded speech itself. Some of the world's most influential languages spread because relatively small populations gained political or technological advantages. Latin expanded through the Roman Empire. Arabic spread through trade, religion, and conquest. English became global through empire, industry, and modern communication systems. None of these linguistic expansions required complete genetic replacement of existing populations. People often change languages while remaining descendants of much older local ancestors. Ancient DNA demonstrated that cultural identity can transform rapidly compared to the slower continuity of biological inheritance. This creates a strange contrast between memory and ancestry. Humans often feel connected most strongly to recent identities preserved through language, religion, and national history. Ancient DNA stretches the timeline much farther backward. It reveals hidden connections to populations whose languages disappeared thousands of years ago. A person speaking a modern language today may carry ancestry from ancient communities no surviving culture remembers. Their forgotten ancestors once named rivers, mountains, and stars using words lost forever. Yet fragments of those people continue surviving inside modern humanity. The deeper scientists study ancient genomes, the more human history appears built upon repeated cycles of cultural change layered over long biological continuity. Languages rise and disappear. Kingdoms form and collapse. Traditions evolve across centuries. Beneath those visible transformations, countless generations continue carrying traces of older worlds forward through time. Ancient DNA revealed that humanity's deepest continuity may exist not in the identities people preserve consciously, but in the invisible inheritance flowing quietly beneath history itself. Human beings often imagine history as something preserved. Libraries protect documents, monuments outlive generations, religions carry stories across centuries. Families repeat names until ancestors feel almost present inside memory itself. Yet ancient DNA revealed how little of humanity's true past was actually remembered. Most people who ever lived disappeared without leaving written records, monuments, or surviving traditions behind. Entire populations vanished so completely that modern science became the first thing capable of detecting they had existed at all. The deeper researchers explored ancient genomes, the more fragile human memory began to seem. Writing itself is recent compared to the length of human existence. Modern humans have lived for roughly 300,000 years, but the oldest writing systems are only a few thousand years old. This means the overwhelming majority of human experience unfolded before history was ever recorded. Millions of lives passed in silence. Ancient hunters crossed valleys no map preserved. Small farming villages rose and disappeared without leaving names behind. Languages formed, evolved, and vanished long before alphabets existed to capture them. For most ancient people, memory survived only through storytelling, and direct human connection. Once those chains broke, entire worlds disappeared. Ancient DNA became powerful partly because it reached beyond this silence. A fragment of bone buried beneath a cave floor might preserve evidence that a forgotten population once lived there thousands of years ago. A tooth recovered from frozen ground might reveal unexpected relationships between distant peoples. No surviving culture remembered. The discoveries created a strange reversal. In some cases, scientists now know more about the ancestry of ancient populations than about their beliefs, languages, or identities. Biology survived where memory failed. Yet even ancient DNA cannot fully restore what was lost. It can identify relationships, migrations, and shared ancestry, but it cannot recover the emotional texture of vanished lives. It cannot explain what ancient people feared during long winters, or what stories parents told children beside fires at night. It cannot restore the sound of extinct languages or reconstruct every system of meaning once carried inside forgotten cultures. The silence remains enormous. Ancient DNA simply illuminated small portions of it. This realization changed how many researchers view civilization itself. Modern societies often place great confidence in permanence. Nations preserve archives. Governments build monuments. Digital technology stores unimaginable amounts of information. Yet ancient DNA reminds humanity that memory is fragile. Across deep time, entire empires once believed themselves eternal before collapsing into ruins. Libraries burned, cities emptied, trade routes vanished beneath deserts or oceans. Even powerful civilizations preserved only fragments of ordinary human life. Most individuals throughout history passed through existence without leaving recoverable records behind. The emotional effect of this knowledge can feel unsettling. Every modern population descends from countless forgotten people whose names are lost forever. Some survived famine, migration, disease, or climate collapse long enough to become ancestors. Others vanished without descendants entirely. Ancient DNA revealed that history remembers only a tiny fraction of humanity's actual experience. Beneath the visible story preserved in textbooks lies another much larger history built from ordinary lives erased by time. This does not make the past meaningless. In some ways, it makes human continuity more remarkable. Despite environmental disasters, extinctions, migrations, and cultural collapse, fragments of ancient humanity survived across unimaginable stretches of time. A person alive today carries biological connections to ancestors who may have lived before the first cities, before metal tools, before agriculture itself. Some belong to populations forgotten so completely that only genetic traces reveal they ever existed. Yet their survival continues invisibly inside the modern human family. Ancient DNA also softened the illusion that modern humanity stands separate from the ancient world. The distance between present and past became smaller once scientists realized how many hidden connections still exist beneath contemporary identities. Modern nations may feel permanent, but ancient DNA shows that populations have always changed, mixed, and transformed across time. Languages disappear, borders move, cultures evolve, memory fades. Yet, biological continuity persists quietly beneath those visible shifts. Humanity became less like a sequence of disconnected civilizations, and more like one long chain of survival, extending backward into darkness. The bones recovered from caves, deserts, and frozen landscapes therefore carry more than scientific information. They reveal the limits of human remembrance itself. Most ancient people expected their children or communities to preserve their existence. Few could imagine disappearing so completely that future humans would need molecular analysis to rediscover them. Ancient DNA exposed how fragile historical memory truly is, but it also revealed something unexpectedly enduring. Even when stories vanish, traces of human connection can survive beyond memory. Beneath the silence of lost civilizations, forgotten languages, and erased identities, fragments of ancient humanity continue moving quietly through the living world, generation after generation, long after history stopped speaking their names. For much of history, human societies have searched for the idea of pure origins. Kingdoms traced noble bloodlines through carefully preserved family trees. Nations created myths about ancient ancestors who supposedly remained separate from outsiders across centuries. Some political movements built entire identities around the belief that populations could remain biologically unchanged if protected from foreign influence. These ideas often felt emotionally powerful because they offered stability. A pure ancestry promised continuity in a world shaped constantly by migration and change. Yet ancient DNA revealed something profoundly different. And I paused. Human history is not a story of isolated bloodlines preserved intact across time. It is a story of continual mixture. The deeper scientists looked into the genetic past. The harder it became to find any population untouched by earlier migrations, blending, and exchange. Even communities that appear culturally ancient and geographically isolated today often carry ancestry from multiple older populations combined together. Ancient DNA showed that movement has always been part of human existence. Long before modern transportation, people crossed mountains, deserts, forests, and oceans. They traded goods, shared technologies, formed alliances, fought wars, married outsiders, and adapted to unfamiliar landscapes. Every major migration left traces inside future generations. Over thousands of years, these layers accumulated until ancestry itself became deeply intertwined. The idea of completely separate human populations surviving unchanged for long periods became increasingly difficult to support scientifically. Europe again provides a clear example. Ancient DNA revealed that most modern Europeans descend from at least 3 major ancestral sources: prehistoric hunter-gatherers, early farmers from Anatolia, and later pastoralist groups connected to the Eurasian steppe. These populations mixed repeatedly over thousands of years. None remained genetically isolated forever. Similar patterns emerged worldwide. Populations in Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Oceania all reflected histories of migration and interaction, far more complex than earlier simplified narratives suggested. Even relatively isolated island populations often showed evidence of ancient contact stretching across enormous distances. Ancient DNA also challenged the emotional simplicity of identity itself. People naturally form strong attachments to ancestry because ancestry creates belonging. Family stories, traditions, and cultural memory connect individuals to larger communities across generations. Ancient DNA does not erase these connections. Instead, it reveals that beneath every identity lies a much older network of hidden relationships extending beyond modern categories. A person may feel rooted in one nation, language, or ethnicity, while unknowingly carrying ancestry from populations that crossed entirely different worlds thousands of years earlier. The human body preserves evidence of migrations memory no longer remembers. This realization became especially important because ideas about pure ancestry have often been used to justify exclusion, hierarchy, and violence. Throughout history, political movements have claimed that certain populations remained biologically superior or uncontaminated by outside influence. Ancient DNA undermined these narratives repeatedly. No modern population exists outside the long human history of movement and mixture. Even groups once believed highly isolated often contain traces of older migrations hidden beneath the surface. Human beings are connected through overlapping ancestries far deeper than recent political identities suggest. Ancient DNA also revealed that mixture itself frequently contributed to survival. Interbreeding between populations allowed useful adaptations to spread across environments. Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry provided certain genetic variants that may have helped modern humans adapt to unfamiliar climates and diseases. Agricultural expansions mixed different populations together, spreading both cultural practices and biological traits. Human adaptability often emerged not through isolation, but through contact. Yet ancient DNA does not support the opposite extreme either. Human populations are not identical or historically interchangeable. Different groups adapted to different environments over long periods. Distinct cultures, languages, and regional identities genuinely developed across history. Ancient DNA simply revealed that these differences emerged within a larger pattern of shared ancestry and continual interaction rather than permanent separation. Humanity's story became one of connection without uniformity. The emotional impact of this discovery reaches beyond science. Many people inherit simplified stories about where they come from, imagining ancestry as a straight line extending backward through one stable identity. Ancient DNA replaced that image with something more layered and uncertain. Beneath every family history lies a vast accumulation of forgotten encounters stretching across continents and millennia. Ancestors moved, blended, disappeared, survived, and transformed repeatedly long before modern identities existed. The search for completely pure origins, therefore, becomes impossible to separate from the reality of human movement itself. The farther scientists trace ancestry backward through time, the more humanity appears, connected through countless migrations no border could permanently contain. Ancient DNA did not erase human differences, but it revealed that no population stands outside the shared history of mixture that shaped the species from the beginning. Beneath modern identities lies a deeper truth written silently inside the genome. Human beings have always been travelers meeting other travelers, carrying fragments of one another forward through time in ways no civilization fully remembered until now. Modern ideas about race often feel ancient, as though humanity has always been divided into fixed biological categories, stretching unchanged across history. Skin color, facial features, language, and geography became markers people used to separate populations into distinct groups. Over centuries, entire political systems formed around these classifications. Some societies treated race as scientific destiny. Others used it to justify slavery, conquest, colonialism, or exclusion. Yet ancient DNA revealed something deeply unsettling beneath these modern categories. Human ancestry does not divide into clean biological boundaries. The deeper scientists explored the genetic past, the more artificial many modern racial assumptions began to appear. This does not mean visible human differences are imaginary. Populations adapted to different climates and environments over long periods. Skin pigmentation, body proportions, and certain physical traits evolved partly in response to sunlight, temperature, diet, and disease pressures. Ancient DNA confirmed these adaptations, but it also revealed that the underlying genetic variation within humanity is far more continuous and interconnected than rigid racial categories suggest. Most genetic differences between human populations are gradual rather than absolute. Human groups have exchanged ancestry repeatedly throughout history, making sharp biological divisions difficult to sustain scientifically. One reason ancient DNA transformed this discussion is because it extended the timeline far beyond recent history. Modern racial categories emerged relatively recently compared to the age of Homo sapiens itself. For most of human existence, populations were constantly moving, separating, reconnecting, and blending across landscapes. Ancient DNA revealed that migration was not an exception to human history. It was one of its central forces. Populations now considered distinct, often shared ancestors, far more recently than earlier theories assumed. Europe again provides an important example. Thousands of years ago, the continent was inhabited by populations, physically and genetically different from many later Europeans. Ancient hunter-gatherers, early Anatolian farmers, and steppe pastoralists all contributed ancestry to modern European populations through repeated migrations and mixture. Even traits modern people sometimes assume were ancient and permanent changed over time. Genetic studies suggest lighter skin pigmentation became widespread in Europe relatively recently in evolutionary terms. Ancient Europeans did not always resemble the populations living there today. Similar patterns appeared elsewhere. Populations in South Asia, East Asia, Africa, and the Americas all reflected long histories of movement and blending that complicated modern racial assumptions. Ancient DNA repeatedly showed that human populations cannot be understood as isolated biological units, existing separately across deep time. This challenged not only scientific models but emotional narratives about identity. Many societies built collective memory around the belief that nations or ethnic groups represented stable ancestral lines, stretching uninterrupted into the distant past. Ancient DNA revealed instead that identities constantly evolved, borders changed, languages spread, populations absorbed outsiders and were transformed by migrations. What modern people often describe as ancient racial or ethnic continuity frequently rests upon many older layers of mixture hidden beneath the surface. Even geographically isolated populations rarely remained entirely separate forever. Ancient DNA also exposed how misleading visible appearance can become when discussing ancestry. Two populations may look superficially similar due to adaptation to comparable environments while possessing different historical origins. Conversely, populations with significant shared ancestry may develop visible differences after adapting to different climates over long periods. Human appearance reflects only a small fraction of the genome. Ancient DNA demonstrated that cultural identity, language, physical traits, and deep ancestry do not always align neatly. This realization weakened biological theories of race that once claimed clear natural divisions existed within humanity. Yet ancient DNA does not erase human diversity. Different populations experience different histories, environments, and adaptations. Cultural traditions remain real and meaningful. What changed was the understanding of how those differences formed. Instead of ancient isolated races developing independently forever, humanity increasingly appeared as one interconnected species, shaped by movement, adaptation, and repeated contact. The boundaries between populations existed, but they shifted constantly across time. The emotional impact of this discovery remains difficult for many societies because identity often depends on stories of origin. People want to know where they come from and who belongs to their community. Ancient DNA does not remove that need, but it suggests that beneath every identity lies a deeper human history far more entangled than modern categories allow. No population stands outside the long story of migration and mixture that shaped the species. Every community alive today descends from countless forgotten encounters, stretching across continents and millennia. In this sense, ancient DNA quietly altered one of humanity's oldest assumptions. It revealed that the search for perfectly separate origins may tell us more about modern fears and political desires than about the actual history of the human species itself. Beneath differences in language, appearance, and culture lies evidence of continual connection, a shared biological inheritance shaped by movement, survival, and blending across an ancient world where no boundary remained permanent forever. For many people, ancestry feels personal in a deeply emotional way. Family names, traditions, languages, and stories create the sense that identity travels clearly from the past into the present. A person may grow up believing their origins belong to one place, one culture, or one uninterrupted line of ancestors extending backward through time. Ancient DNA did not erase the importance of those identities, but it revealed something more complicated beneath them. The deeper scientists traced human ancestry, the more tangled the story became. Beneath every modern identity lies a network of forgotten migrations, mixtures, disappearances, and encounters stretching far beyond what memory preserved. This realization can feel both unsettling and strangely humbling at the same time. For centuries, many societies taught simplified origin stories because simplicity creates stability. Nations often describe themselves as ancient peoples rooted permanently in one territory. Families preserve legends about pure ancestral lines. Communities define belonging through the idea of shared blood, connecting members to a single historical source. Ancient DNA disrupted these narratives repeatedly. The evidence showed that human populations almost never remained isolated for long. Ancestors moved constantly across landscapes, absorbed outsiders, formed new identities, and adapted to changing worlds. The farther backward scientists looked, the less any ancestry resembled a straight line. Instead, humanity's past appeared more like countless rivers crossing, separating, and reconnecting again across time. This discovery changed how many people think about belonging. If every population contains layers of ancestry from older migrations, then identity becomes less about biological purity and more about shared cultural memory shaped within particular moments of history. Ancient DNA revealed that most humans carry inherited connections to ancient populations they know nothing about consciously. A person may identify strongly with one language or nation while carrying ancestry from forgotten communities whose names disappeared thousands of years ago. The human body preserves evidence of encounters history itself no longer remembers. For some people, these discoveries created discomfort because ancestry is often tied to certainty. Human beings naturally search for stable origins in order to understand themselves. Ancient DNA replaced certainty with complexity. A population thought isolated turns out to contain traces of earlier migrations. A cultural identity believed ancient reveals unexpected connections to distant groups. Even families using modern genetic ancestry tests sometimes discover lineages they never expected. The emotional response varies widely. Some feel curiosity and wonder. Others feel resistance because deeply held stories about identity become harder to sustain. Yet ancient DNA also introduced another possibility. Instead of weakening human identity, complexity may reveal how interconnected survival has always been. No modern population emerged alone. Every community alive today exists because countless earlier people crossed borders, adapted to unfamiliar environments, survived catastrophes, and formed relationships beyond the limits of tribe or territory. Human continuity depended repeatedly on movement and exchange. Even some of the most famous civilizations in history were themselves products of earlier mixtures hidden beneath the surface. Ancient DNA, therefore, shifted attention away from purity toward connection. This perspective becomes especially powerful when considering how fragile human survival often was. Small populations endured ice ages, droughts, epidemics, and environmental collapse. Entire groups disappeared while others survived only through blending into neighboring communities. The ancestors of modern humanity were not protected by permanence. They survived because they adapted continuously. Ancient DNA revealed that the human story was built not through isolation from outsiders, but through repeated encounters with them. The emotional meaning of this realization reaches beyond science. Modern societies often divide people into categories that feel permanent and absolute. Ancient DNA quietly undermines that certainty. Beneath visible differences lies evidence that humanity has always been biologically intertwined. The boundaries separating populations shifted constantly across generations. Languages changed, religions spread, nations rose and collapsed. Yet human ancestry continued flowing beneath those transformations, carrying fragments of ancient worlds forward into the present. This does not eliminate cultural identity or historical experience. It simply places them inside a much larger timeline, where mixture is normal rather than exceptional. The deeper scientists explore ancient genomes, the more humanity begins to resemble a single long migration unfolding across thousands of generations. Every person alive today descends from survivors whose paths crossed in ways impossible to fully reconstruct now. Some encounters were peaceful, others were violent, some populations disappeared entirely. Others survived through inheritance invisible to history itself. Ancient DNA cannot tell humans exactly who they are, but it changes the question. Instead of asking where one pure origin began, humanity is forced to confront a more difficult reality. Modern people are the living result of countless forgotten journeys layered together across time. Beneath every identity lies a history far older, more fragile, and more interconnected than earlier generations ever imagined. Ancient DNA did more than rewrite humanity's past. It also changed how scientists understand the modern human body itself. For centuries, people often imagined evolution as something distant, belonging to prehistoric worlds filled with extinct animals and primitive humans. Modern civilization seemed separate from those ancient struggles for survival. Yet ancient DNA revealed that the bodies people carry today are still shaped by decisions, migrations, diseases, and environments from thousands of years ago. The past never fully disappeared. It remained inside human biology, influencing health, adaptation, and vulnerability in ways most people never notice. One of the clearest examples involves immunity. Ancient humans lived in environments filled with constantly changing pathogens. As populations migrated into new climates and began interacting with unfamiliar animals and neighboring groups, they encountered diseases their ancestors had never faced before. Every epidemic created evolutionary pressure. Individuals carrying genetic variants that improved survival were more likely to pass those variants forward into future generations. Ancient DNA allowed scientists to trace some of these changes across time. Researchers comparing ancient and modern genomes discovered that many immune-related genes shifted significantly after the rise of agriculture and dense settlements. Farming communities lived closer together than hunter-gatherers, creating ideal conditions for infectious diseases to spread. Domesticated animals also introduced new biological risks, because viruses and bacteria could jump between species more easily. Human immune systems adapted gradually to this transformed world. Yet these adaptations often involved trade-offs. Some genetic variants that once improved resistance against deadly infections may now contribute to autoimmune disorders or chronic inflammation in modern populations. The body still carries echoes of ancient survival pressures even though the environments that created them have changed dramatically. Ancient DNA also revealed that interbreeding with other human groups may have influenced modern health. Certain Neanderthal and Denisovan genetic variants remain present in living populations today. Some of these inherited fragments appear connected to immune responses, skin biology, metabolism, and adaptation to climate. Researchers believe a few Neanderthal-derived genes may have helped Homo sapiens survive unfamiliar Eurasian pathogens after migrating out of Africa. In this sense, ancient encounters between human groups did not simply affect ancestry abstractly. They may have contributed directly to survival inside new ecological conditions. Yet inherited adaptations are not always beneficial in the modern world. Some Neanderthal-linked variants have also been associated in research studies with increased risks for allergies, depression, nicotine addiction, or certain inflammatory conditions. Ancient DNA revealed that evolution does not create perfection. It produces compromises shaped by past environments that may become mismatched later. Climate adaptation provides another powerful example. Human populations living for thousands of years in different regions evolved distinct biological responses to sunlight, temperature, altitude, and available food sources. Ancient DNA allowed scientists to track how these adaptations spread across generations. In northern regions with lower sunlight exposure, lighter skin pigmentation became more common over time because it improved vitamin D production. High-altitude populations in Tibet developed genetic adaptations influencing oxygen use, likely connected partly to ancient Denisovan ancestry. Arctic populations evolved metabolic traits suited to diets rich in marine fats. These examples demonstrated that human evolution continued well into relatively recent history. Modern humans are not biologically identical populations, separated only by culture. They are descendants of ancestors who adapted to different environments across immense stretches of time. At the same time, ancient DNA challenged simplistic biological thinking. No population possesses perfectly pure adaptations or fixed biological identities. Migration and mixture repeatedly redistributed genetic traits across regions. Human biology reflects layered histories rather than isolated categories. Even traits associated strongly with certain populations today often spread gradually through complex patterns of migration and inheritance. Ancient DNA also transformed the study of historical diseases themselves. Scientists extracted pathogen DNA from ancient skeletons, identifying traces of plague, tuberculosis, hepatitis, and other infections preserved inside human remains. This allowed researchers to study how diseases evolved alongside human populations. Some ancient epidemics that devastated communities centuries ago still influence modern pathogens today. The biological relationship between humans and disease stretches deep into prehistory. Every generation inherited not only ancestry from its ancestors, but also the consequences of ancient biological battles fought long before modern medicine existed. The emotional effect of these discoveries is subtle but profound. Modern people often think of themselves as separate from ancient humanity because technology changed so dramatically. Yet ancient DNA reveals that the body remains deeply connected to prehistoric survival. The immune system, metabolism, and even certain vulnerabilities still carry marks from migrations across Ice Age landscapes, encounters with extinct human relatives, and adaptations to environments no longer recognizable today. Civilization may feel modern, but the human body still remembers older worlds silently written into the genome. Beneath modern cities, languages, and technologies survives a biological inheritance shaped by countless generations, struggling to survive environments that disappeared long ago. Ancient DNA showed that the past did not end. It continues living quietly inside the human body itself. For most of history, epidemics arrived like invisible storms. Communities watched people weaken and die without understanding what was spreading among them. Villages emptied, trade routes collapsed. Entire populations sometimes vanished within a few generations. Written records preserved fragments of these disasters, but many ancient outbreaks occurred long before medicine could identify their causes. Ancient DNA changed this dramatically. Scientists discovered that traces of ancient pathogens sometimes survive inside human remains, allowing researchers to reconstruct diseases that once moved silently through forgotten worlds. The dead began revealing biological evidence of epidemics' history only partially remembered. This transformed the study of disease into something much deeper than written history alone. By extracting DNA from teeth, bones, and preserved tissue, scientists identified ancient strains of plague, tuberculosis, hepatitis, smallpox, and many other infections. Some pathogens survived for thousands of years inside microscopic fragments hidden within human remains. Ancient DNA allowed researchers to compare ancient diseases with modern ones, tracing how epidemics evolved across time. Humanity's relationship with illness suddenly appeared far older and more continuous than earlier generations realized. One of the most famous examples involved Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for plague. Historically, plague became infamous through events like the Black Death, which devastated Europe during the 14th century. Yet ancient DNA revealed that plague existed far earlier than medieval history suggested. Researchers identified ancient plague strains inside human remains dating back thousands of years before the Black Death. Some early forms of the bacterium lacked genetic features associated with the rapid flea-borne transmission that later made medieval outbreaks so catastrophic. This suggested plague evolved gradually over long periods before becoming one of history's deadliest pandemics. Ancient DNA therefore showed disease not as a fixed enemy, but as something evolving alongside humanity itself. The rise of agriculture played a major role in this changing relationship between humans and pathogens. Before farming, hunter-gatherer groups lived in relatively small and mobile communities. Infectious diseases struggled to spread widely among sparse populations, constantly moving across large territories. Agriculture transformed these conditions. Permanent settlements, denser populations, stored food supplies, and close contact with domesticated animals created environments where pathogens could circulate more effectively. Ancient DNA studies supported the idea that many major infectious diseases expanded alongside the growth of agricultural societies and urban life. Human civilization unintentionally created new ecological opportunities for disease. Trade networks intensified this process further. As civilizations expanded, merchants, soldiers, migrants, and travelers carried pathogens across enormous distances. Diseases moved along the same routes as goods, languages, and ideas. Ancient DNA revealed that epidemics were often deeply connected to human mobility itself. A pathogen originating in one region could eventually reshape populations thousands of miles away once trade and migration linked distant societies together. The biological history of humanity became inseparable from the history of movement across landscapes. Ancient DNA also uncovered how diseases influenced human evolution. Epidemics created powerful selective pressures because survival often depended partly on genetic variation, affecting immunity. Individuals carrying protective variants were more likely to survive outbreaks and pass those traits forward. Over generations, populations gradually changed biologically in response to repeated exposure to pathogens. Some immune system genes common today may reflect ancient battles against infections that no longer exist in the same form. The modern human body, therefore, carries evidence not only of migration and ancestry, but also of survival against invisible biological threats stretching deep into the past. Yet these adaptations often came with costs. Genetic variants, beneficial against one disease, could increase vulnerability to other conditions later. Ancient DNA helped scientists understand how certain immune responses linked to ancient survival pressures may now contribute to autoimmune diseases or chronic inflammation in modern environments. Evolution produced compromises rather than perfect solutions. The body still reflects biological negotiations shaped by worlds very different from modern life. There is also something emotionally haunting about recovering ancient pathogens from human remains. A skeleton buried thousands of years ago may still contain traces of the disease that ended that person's life. Ancient DNA transforms those remains into witnesses of forgotten suffering. Entire communities may have experienced epidemics severe enough to alter migration patterns, collapse settlements, or erase populations from history almost completely. Yet until recently, the biological causes remained invisible. Now fragments of those ancient diseases reappear inside laboratories, allowing modern humans to glimpse struggles their ancestors faced without understanding them scientifically. This perspective changes how humanity views modern disease as well. Epidemics are not new interruptions in an otherwise stable human story. They are part of a long relationship between humans and evolving pathogens extending across millennia. Ancient DNA revealed that every civilization existed alongside invisible biological pressures shaping survival continuously. The modern world often feels technologically distant from prehistory, yet the same fundamental struggle remains. Humans adapt, pathogens adapt, Migration spreads both populations and disease. Biological history continues unfolding beneath politics, culture, and technology much as it always has. The deeper scientists study ancient DNA, the more modern humanity appears connected to ancient lives not only through ancestry, but through shared vulnerability. Beneath every civilization, past and present, lies the same fragile biological reality: human beings trying to survive in a world where invisible forces have always traveled beside them through history. The modern human body often feels ordinary because people live inside it every day. Breathing, eating, sleeping, healing, and aging seem natural and familiar. Yet ancient DNA revealed that beneath this ordinary experience lies an immense archive of survival stretching across hundreds of thousands of years. The body is not only a product of the present world, it is also a record of ancient environments, migrations, diseases, and adaptations layered together through countless generations. In many ways, modern humans still live with biological memories formed long before civilization existed. These memories are not conscious thoughts. They are patterns preserved inside genes, metabolism, immunity, and instinctive responses shaped by ancestral survival. One of the clearest examples involves the human stress response. For prehistoric humans, survival often depended on reacting quickly to danger. Sudden movement in tall grass could signal a predator. Harsh winters threatened starvation. Conflict between groups carried deadly risks. The body evolved systems capable of mobilizing energy rapidly during emergencies. Hormones increased heart rate, sharpened attention, and prepared muscles for immediate action. These responses helped ancient humans survive unpredictable environments. Yet modern societies changed far faster than biology could adapt. Today, many people experience chronic psychological stress rather than immediate physical threats. But the body still reacts using ancient survival mechanisms developed for very different conditions. Ancient DNA cannot measure emotions directly, yet it reveals how slowly biological evolution moves compared to cultural transformation. The body often remains adapted to worlds that no longer exist. Diet offers another powerful example. Ancient hunter-gatherers survived on highly varied foods shaped by local ecosystems and seasonal availability. Agricultural societies later depended heavily on staple crops and domesticated animals. Industrial civilization transformed food again, within only a few centuries, introducing levels of sugar, processing, and caloric abundance unprecedented in earlier human history. Ancient DNA revealed that populations adapted partially to some dietary changes over thousands of years, such as lactose tolerance among dairy farming groups. Yet many aspects of modern nutrition developed far too recently for extensive biological adaptation to occur. The human body still carries metabolic systems shaped by ancient scarcity, even while living in environments of abundance. This mismatch influences modern health in complex ways. Sleep itself reflects ancient conditions. For most of human existence, darkness controlled daily rhythms more completely than artificial light does today. Human circadian systems evolved under cycles of sunlight, firelight, seasonal variation, and outdoor environments. Ancient DNA studies connected certain biological rhythms and adaptations to geographic environments experienced over long timescales. Modern life altered these rhythms dramatically through electric light, digital technology, and urban schedules. Yet the body still operates using systems rooted in much older environmental patterns. In this sense, modern humans remain biologically connected to ancestral worlds even while living inside technological civilizations. Ancient DNA also deepened understanding of inherited vulnerability. Some genetic traits once beneficial for survival now interact unpredictably with modern environments. Variants associated with storing fat efficiently may have protected ancient populations during famine, yet contribute to metabolic disease under constant food availability. Immune responses shaped by ancient epidemics may now influence allergies or autoimmune disorders. Adaptations that evolved slowly across thousands of years can become mismatched when human environments transform within only a few generations. Evolution works through survival in past conditions, not preparation for future societies. This realization changes how humanity understands health itself. The body is not a perfectly engineered machine designed for modern life. It is the temporary result of ancient compromises accumulated through survival. Ancient DNA also revealed something emotionally profound about continuity. Every person alive today carries biological connections to ancestors who survived unimaginable conditions. Ice ages, droughts, migrations, epidemics, and violence all shaped the inheritance flowing into the present. Countless human beings disappeared from history completely, yet fragments of their survival remain embedded inside modern genomes. The body therefore becomes more than an individual possession. It becomes part of a much older chain extending backward through forgotten worlds. Even small inherited traits may reflect environmental pressures faced by ancestors thousands of years ago. The deeper scientists study ancient DNA, the more modern humanity appears suspended between two realities. Culturally, humans live inside rapidly changing technological systems. Biologically, they still carry bodies shaped largely by prehistoric conditions. Civilization transformed landscapes, communication, and knowledge with extraordinary speed. But evolution moves gradually across generations. Inside modern cities survive nervous systems, immune responses, and metabolic patterns forged in environments of uncertainty and survival. Ancient DNA revealed that the past is not truly separate from the present because the body itself remains partly ancient. Beneath every modern identity exists a biological inheritance carrying memories of climates, migrations, diseases, and encounters no living person consciously remembers. Humanity may believe it escaped the ancient world, yet traces of that world continue breathing quietly inside every human life. Ancient DNA began as a tool for studying the distant past, but over time it started changing how humanity thinks about the future as well. At first, researchers focused mainly on reconstructing migrations, extinct populations, and prehistoric relationships. Yet the more scientists learned, the clearer another realization became. Human evolution never truly stopped. The forces that shaped ancient populations, climate change, disease, migration, adaptation, and technological transformation still continue today, although in new forms. Ancient DNA revealed that humanity is not standing outside evolution looking backward at completed history. Humanity is still inside the process. The modern world may appear stable compared to prehistoric survival, but biologically and environmentally, change continues unfolding constantly beneath the surface. This realization carries enormous implications because modern civilization is transforming human environments faster than ever before. For most ancient populations, environmental pressures changed gradually across thousands of years. Ice ages advanced slowly, forests shifted over generations, human migration unfolded step by step across landscapes. Evolution responded slowly because conditions remained relatively stable over long periods. Modern humanity changed that pace dramatically. Industrialization, urbanization, medicine, agriculture, and global transportation reshaped human life within only a few centuries, a brief moment compared to evolutionary timescales. Ancient DNA revealed that the human body often adapts slowly, carrying systems designed for older worlds into rapidly changing environments. This raises difficult questions about what future humans may become under conditions unlike anything earlier generations experienced. Climate change provides one of the clearest examples. Ancient DNA helped scientists study how earlier human populations responded to environmental instability, droughts, temperature shifts, and ecosystem collapse. Some communities migrated successfully into new regions. Others disappeared or blended into neighboring groups. Human survival often depended on flexibility rather than permanence. Modern climate change now unfolds globally, affecting food systems, coastlines, disease patterns, and migration pressures across enormous populations simultaneously. Ancient DNA cannot predict the future directly, but it reveals how deeply environmental change has shaped human destiny in the past. Civilizations often feel permanent until ecological pressure exposes their fragility. Ancient DNA also changed how scientists think about human diversity moving forward. Throughout history, migration repeatedly mixed populations together, spreading adaptations and reshaping ancestry across continents. Modern globalization accelerates this process at unprecedented speed. Populations once separated by geography now interact continuously through travel, trade, and communication networks. Human genetic isolation decreases as movement becomes easier across borders. Ancient DNA suggests this pattern is not unnatural or unprecedented. Human history has always involved connection and mixture. The difference today lies in scale and speed. The modern world compresses interactions that once unfolded across centuries into single generations. Technology introduces another layer of uncertainty. Ancient humans adapted biologically to environments shaped mostly by nature. Modern humans increasingly live inside environments shaped by their own inventions. Medicine allows individuals with conditions once fatal to survive and reproduce. Artificial light alters sleep cycles evolved under sunlight and darkness. Processed food transforms metabolism. Digital systems reshape attention, memory, and social behavior. Ancient DNA revealed how strongly biology responds to environmental pressure over long periods. Yet it also showed that evolution operates slowly compared to cultural change. Humanity may now be creating conditions the body has not had time to adapt to fully. This tension between ancient biology and modern civilization may define much of the future human experience. Ancient DNA also forced humanity to reconsider permanence itself. Many ancient populations disappeared, believing their worlds were stable. Languages vanished. Civilizations collapsed. Entire genetic lineages ended during droughts, epidemics, or migrations. Modern societies often assume technological progress guarantees continuity, yet ancient DNA reveals how fragile human systems can become when environments shift unexpectedly. Survival has never been guaranteed. Every living population descends from ancestors who endured instability repeatedly across history. Yet ancient DNA offers something more than warning. It also reveals extraordinary resilience. Humans survived ice ages, volcanic winters, pandemics, famine, and migrations across hostile landscapes. Small populations repeatedly adapted to conditions that could easily have ended them. The modern human species exists because countless earlier generations remained flexible enough to survive changing worlds. Ancient DNA therefore changes the meaning of the future itself. The future is not detached from the past. It emerges from the same long process of adaptation that shaped every earlier chapter of human existence. The emotional effect of this realization is difficult to escape. Modern civilization often encourages the illusion that humanity stands apart from nature and history, directing its own destiny through technology alone. Ancient DNA quietly undermines that confidence. Beneath modern systems remain ancient biological realities shaped by evolution, environment, and survival pressures, far older than civilization itself. The same species that once crossed frozen landscapes, carrying stone tools, now build satellites and artificial intelligence, yet the deeper patterns remain familiar. Humans continue adapting to changing environments while carrying the accumulated inheritance of older worlds inside their bodies. Ancient DNA revealed that the future of humanity cannot be separated from the ancient pathways that created humanity in the first place. For almost all of human history, evolution operated without intention. Climate shifts, disease, famine, migration, and reproduction gradually shaped populations across thousands of generations. Humans adapted to changing environments slowly, often without understanding the biological processes involved. Ancient DNA allowed scientists to reconstruct parts of this long story, revealing how survival pressures influenced the modern human body over immense stretches of time. Yet the modern world introduced something entirely new into that process. For the first time, humans began developing technologies capable of directly altering biology itself. This possibility raised a question no earlier civilization could seriously ask. If evolution once shaped humanity through natural pressures alone, what happens when humans begin consciously changing their own genetic future? Ancient DNA became central to this discussion because it revealed how complex human biology actually is. Earlier generations sometimes imagined genes as simple instructions that could easily be adjusted to improve humanity. The deeper scientists explored ancient genomes, however. The more interconnected and unpredictable genetic systems appeared. Traits rarely exist in isolation. A genetic variant beneficial in one environment may create risks in another. Adaptations that improved survival during ancient epidemics may now contribute to autoimmune disease. Metabolic traits useful during food scarcity may become harmful in modern abundance. Ancient DNA repeatedly demonstrated that evolution operates through trade-offs rather than perfect design. This complexity creates caution around modern genetic technologies. Scientists today possess tools capable of editing DNA in ways unimaginable even a few decades ago. Techniques such as CRISPR allow researchers to alter specific genetic sequences with increasing precision. Medical researchers hope these technologies may eventually help prevent severe inherited diseases or repair harmful mutations. Some treatments already exist experimentally for certain conditions. Yet ancient DNA reminds humanity that genes are products of long evolutionary histories shaped by environments, interactions, and hidden consequences not always visible immediately. Changing one element inside the genome may influence many others in unexpected ways across future generations. Ancient DNA also complicates the idea of human improvement itself. Throughout history, many societies believed they could define ideal human traits scientifically or politically. These ideas often produced destructive consequences because they reduced human complexity into narrow categories of worth. Ancient DNA undermined such simplistic thinking by revealing how interconnected and variable human populations truly are. No single genome represents a perfect or original version of humanity. Every population reflects ancient mixtures, adaptations, and compromises accumulated across time. Human diversity itself became part of the species' survival strategy. This perspective matters deeply when discussing the future of genetic engineering. The question is not simply whether humans can alter biology, but whether they fully understand the long history embedded within it. Technology may also change evolution indirectly without editing genes at all. Modern medicine already allows individuals to survive conditions that once would have prevented reproduction. Global transportation reshapes patterns of migration and mixture. Artificial environments alter diet, sleep, social behavior, and exposure to disease. Ancient DNA revealed that biology responds gradually to environmental conditions over generations. Human civilization now changes those conditions continuously at extraordinary speed. The future of evolution may therefore involve both intentional genetic intervention and unintended biological consequences emerging from modern lifestyles themselves. Another unsettling possibility emerges from this realization. For most ancient populations, adaptation occurred through collective survival over long timescales. Modern technology introduces the potential for unequal biological advantages shaped by wealth, politics, or access to medical systems. Ancient DNA showed repeatedly that human populations survived through mixture and shared adaptation rather than rigid separation. Yet future technologies could create pressures toward new forms of division if biological enhancement ever becomes unevenly distributed. These concerns remain speculative, but ancient DNA provides historical perspective on how dangerous ideas about biological superiority have become in the past. The emotional weight of this subject lies partly in its uncertainty. Ancient DNA revealed that humanity never fully controlled its own development before. Evolution unfolded through countless unpredictable interactions between environment, disease, migration, and chance. Modern humans now possess tools capable of influencing biological inheritance directly. Yet they remain products of evolutionary systems far more complex than complete understanding currently allows. The same species that only recently discovered Neanderthal ancestry hidden inside its genome is now discussing how to redesign parts of that genome intentionally. This creates a strange tension between knowledge and humility. Ancient DNA expanded humanity's power to understand itself, but it also revealed how incomplete that understanding still remains. The future of human evolution may no longer depend solely on nature in the traditional sense. Technology, medicine, climate change, and global migration are already reshaping the conditions under which future generations will live. Yet, ancient DNA offers a quiet warning beneath this transformation. Human biology is not a machine built from isolated parts. It is the living result of hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation, compromise, survival, and interconnected history. Every gene carries echoes of ancient worlds. Every modern body reflects countless forgotten pressures that shaped the species long before civilization existed. As humanity begins considering how to influence its own biological future, ancient DNA reminds us that the human story has never been simple, predictable, or fully under control. For thousands of years, humans searched for stable definitions of themselves. Religions described humanity through spiritual origins, Philosophers debated reason, consciousness, and morality. Nations defined belonging through language, territory, or ancestry. Science later attempted biological classifications, separating populations into categories that often appeared fixed and permanent. Yet, ancient DNA quietly disrupted all of these certainties. The deeper scientists traced human history backward, the harder it became to define humanity as something stable or isolated. Human beings were never motionless in time. They changed continuously through migration, adaptation, mixture, and survival. Even the species itself emerged gradually rather than appearing suddenly in one perfect form. This creates a difficult philosophical question beneath all the scientific discoveries. If humanity has always been changing, then what exactly remains constant across that change? Ancient DNA revealed that the human story cannot be reduced to one uninterrupted line. Homo sapiens shared the world with other human groups for thousands of years. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly additional populations existed alongside early modern humans. Boundaries between them were incomplete. Interbreeding occurred. Ancestry crossed between groups. Some populations disappeared while fragments of them survived inside others. The deeper researchers looked, the more humanity resembled a flowing process rather than a fixed category. Modern humans are not separate from that older world. They emerge from it gradually. This realization changes the emotional meaning of identity. People often imagine themselves as belonging to clearly defined groups standing apart from outsiders. Ancient DNA suggests those boundaries were always temporary. Languages changed. Populations mixed. Cultures transformed. Ancestors crossed territories modern maps did not yet exist to divide. Every generation inherited traces from older worlds, while creating something slightly new at the same time. Human continuity, therefore, may not come from permanence, but from movement itself. What survived across history was not purity or stability. It was the ability to adapt while still remaining recognizably human. Yet this raises another question. If humanity changes continuously, how much change can occur before something becomes fundamentally different? Ancient DNA cannot answer this directly, but it frames the problem in a new way. Earlier human populations already displayed variation in body structure, adaptation, and ancestry. Future technological changes may alter biology even further. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, cybernetic systems, and environmental transformation could reshape human life in ways ancient generations could never imagine. Humanity may continue evolving culturally and biologically into forms difficult for modern people to predict. The ancient past revealed by DNA suggests this process is not unnatural. Change has always been part of human existence. Still, emotional tension remains because people search for continuity beneath change. Ancient DNA offers one possible answer. Across hundreds of thousands of years, despite migration, mixture, extinction, and adaptation, humans continued forming relationships, sharing knowledge, protecting children, grieving losses, and searching for meaning. The tools changed, languages disappeared, bodies adapted to different climates and diseases, yet some recognizable emotional and social patterns endured across deep time. Ancient DNA cannot measure love, fear, hope, or memory directly, but the survival of human communities depended constantly on cooperation and connection between generations. Perhaps humanity is defined less by biological purity than by this long continuity of shared experience unfolding through changing forms. The discoveries also create humility. Modern civilization often treats itself as separate from ancient humanity, as though technology ended the older struggle for survival. Ancient DNA reveals instead that modern people remain part of the same long story. Beneath digital networks and modern cities survive bodies shaped by prehistoric environments. Beneath national identities survive traces of forgotten migrations. Beneath every family history lie ancestors who endured climates, epidemics, and uncertainties no one alive can fully imagine now. Humanity appears less like the final stage of evolution and more like one temporary chapter inside a much larger process still unfolding. This perspective changes how the future feels. Ancient DNA showed that no population, language, or civilization remained permanent forever. Everything changed eventually. Yet something also continued through all those transformations. Fragments of ancient humans survived inside future generations. Knowledge moved forward imperfectly. Adaptation continued. Life persisted through instability repeatedly across time. The modern human species exists because countless earlier populations endured uncertainty without fully understanding where history was carrying them. In this sense, humanity has always lived between continuity and transformation at the same time. The deeper scientists explore ancient DNA, the more the question of what it means to be human shifts away from simple definitions. Humanity may not be a fixed biological condition preserved unchanged across history. It may instead be an ongoing relationship between memory, adaptation, survival, and connection, stretching across immense spans of time. Every living person carries evidence of this process inside the body itself. Ancient DNA revealed that the human story was never static, never pure, and never entirely complete. It is still unfolding now, quietly moving forward through generations who remain connected to ancient worlds they can no longer remember, yet still carry within them. When ancient DNA first emerged as a scientific tool, many researchers hoped it would help fill gaps in human history. Few expected it would transform the entire shape of that history itself. Yet piece by piece, ancient genomes uncovered something far larger than isolated discoveries about migration or ancestry. They revealed that human history resembles a vast network of lost paths crossing and reconnecting across immense stretches of time. Some paths ended in extinction, others disappeared into mixture. Many left no written memory behind at all, yet fragments of them continued surviving invisibly inside future generations. The deeper scientists looked, the less humanity resembled a straight line moving cleanly from primitive origins toward modern civilization. Instead, the human story appeared layered, tangled, and unfinished. Long before cities existed, humans were already moving across continents beneath unfamiliar skies. Small groups crossed deserts, forests, frozen plains, and coastlines, carrying knowledge no archaeology can fully recover now. Some populations adapted to cold northern climates, others survived in tropical islands or mountain plateaus. Different human groups encountered one another repeatedly, sometimes exchanging genes, technologies, or survival strategies. Ancient DNA showed that no single migration created the modern world. Humanity emerged from countless journeys overlapping across time. Some of those journeys succeeded only briefly before disappearing. Others survived by blending into larger populations whose descendants still live today. This perspective changes how the past feels emotionally. Traditional history often focuses on civilizations because civilizations leave monuments, writing systems, and political memory behind. Ancient DNA shifted attention toward ordinary human survival beneath those visible structures. Long before empires recorded victories or kings preserved names in stone, anonymous communities were already shaping humanity's future through movement, adaptation, and reproduction. Every modern population descends partly from people history never remembered. Entire cultures vanished before writing existed to preserve them. Languages disappeared without leaving a single surviving sentence behind. Yet ancient DNA proved those forgotten people were still part of the modern human story. The idea of lost paths also changes how extinction is understood. Earlier generations often imagined extinction as total disappearance, a clean ending separating the living from the dead. Ancient DNA revealed something more complicated. Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct population, yet fragments of their ancestry survived inside Homo sapiens. Denisovans vanished almost entirely from memory, yet parts of them continue influencing modern biology. Ancient farming populations replaced some earlier communities while absorbing others into themselves. Again and again, humanity's history unfolded through partial survival hidden inside transformation. The past rarely vanished completely. It continued quietly within later generations who no longer remembered where certain inherited fragments came from. Ancient DNA also revealed how fragile certainty becomes across deep time. Many modern identities feel permanent because they exist inside recorded history. Nations preserve origin stories. Families trace ancestry through names and documents. Yet beyond the limits of writing, human continuity becomes much harder to define clearly. Populations mixed repeatedly. Languages changed. Migrations altered entire regions over centuries. Ancient DNA exposed how temporary most historical boundaries truly are. The categories modern humans often treat as ancient and stable may represent only recent layers placed over much older patterns of movement and exchange. This realization can feel unsettling because it removes simple narratives about origin and belonging. Yet it also creates a broader understanding of connection. Beneath every identity lies evidence of shared survival, stretching across forgotten worlds. The emotional center of ancient DNA may therefore be less about discovering who is separate from humanity, and more about discovering how deeply interconnected humanity always was. Even populations isolated by geography eventually reveal traces of older contact. Human beings repeatedly cross boundaries thought impossible. Oceans, mountains, deserts, and ice slowed movement, but rarely stopped it forever. Across thousands of generations, ancestors carried fragments of one another into new lands until the modern world emerged from layers of hidden relationships no civilization fully remembered. This perspective also changes how the future appears. If the past was built from countless lost paths, then the present is only one temporary crossroads inside a much longer journey. Modern humanity often sees itself as the culmination of history, yet ancient DNA suggests otherwise. Earlier populations also believed their worlds were stable and permanent, before climates shifted, migrations began, or societies disappeared. Human history never stopped changing. The same forces that shaped ancient populations, movement, adaptation, environmental pressure, disease, and cultural transformation still continue now beneath modern technology and global civilization. Ancient DNA, therefore, becomes more than a scientific archive of the past. It becomes a reminder that humanity itself is unfinished. The lost paths uncovered inside ancient genomes reveal how much of human existence unfolded beyond memory, beyond borders, and beyond the stories civilizations told about themselves. Every modern person carries traces of those forgotten journeys within the body. Beneath languages, nations, and recorded history survives a deeper inheritance formed by generations who crossed landscapes no map preserved, searching for survival in worlds that disappeared long ago. Ancient DNA restored fragments of those lost paths, but it also revealed how much of the human story still remains hidden in silence. For most people, history feels distant. Ancient migrations, extinct populations, and prehistoric climates seem disconnected from ordinary daily life. Modern humans wake beneath electric light, travel through crowded cities, and communicate instantly across continents. The ancient world appears buried beneath museums, fossils, and forgotten ruins. Yet ancient DNA quietly erased part of that distance. It revealed that the past is not truly gone because every living person carries pieces of it within the body itself. The discoveries were never only about ancient bones or extinct populations. They changed how humans understand themselves in the present moment. Beneath every modern identity exists a biological inheritance shaped by journeys, losses, adaptations, and encounters stretching far beyond memory. This realization changes the meaning of ancestry. Many people grow up imagining their origins as relatively simple stories tied to one culture, nation, or family line. Ancient DNA revealed something far more layered. Every person descends from countless individuals whose lives unfolded across different landscapes and historical worlds. Some ancestors survived migrations during periods of climate instability. Others lived through epidemics, famine, or cultural collapse. Many belong to populations history no longer remembers by name. Their languages disappeared. Their beliefs vanished. Yet fragments of them survived biologically inside future generations. A modern human body, therefore, becomes less like a single origin and more like an archive of overlapping human histories carried forward through time. This perspective can feel strangely intimate. Ancient DNA transformed abstract prehistory into something physically personal. The story of Ice Age hunters, early farmers, forgotten migrants, and extinct human relatives no longer belongs only to museums or academic research. Their survival helped shape the biology of people alive now, traits influencing immunity, metabolism, appearance, and adaptation emerged through ancient struggles that still echo faintly inside the modern body. Even inherited fragments from Neanderthals or Denisovans remain present in many populations today. Humanity did not simply replace earlier worlds. It absorbed parts of them, Ancient DNA also changes how humans think about identity and belonging. Modern societies often divide people into categories that feel stable and absolute. Nations, ethnicities, and cultures create powerful emotional meaning because they organize memory and social life. Ancient DNA does not erase those identities, but it places them inside a much larger timeline. Beneath recent historical divisions lies evidence that humanity has always been connected through migration and mixture. Every population alive today descends from ancestors who moved, adapted, and interacted with others repeatedly across thousands of years. The boundaries separating people now are real socially and politically, yet biologically they rest upon deeper histories of shared survival. This realization can create humility. No modern community emerged alone or remained untouched by change forever. The discoveries also reshape how humans think about permanence. Civilizations often imagine themselves enduring indefinitely, but ancient DNA reveals how fragile continuity can become across deep time. Entire populations once believed their cultures permanent before droughts, epidemics, migrations, or environmental shifts transformed everything around them. Languages disappeared, trade routes vanished, communities dissolved into others. Yet ancient DNA also reveals remarkable endurance beneath that fragility. Even when identities changed or memories faded, fragments of ancient humanity continued surviving through inheritance. The modern world exists because countless earlier people adapted successfully enough to leave descendants despite uncertainty they could never fully understand. There is something emotionally powerful in recognizing this continuity. Every living person represents an unbroken chain stretching backward through unimaginable stretches of time. Ancestors survived conditions harsh enough to erase entire populations. Some crossed frozen landscapes during ice ages. Others endured starvation, disease, or displacement. Most never imagined that distant descendants would one day study fragments of their DNA inside laboratories, yet their survival continues silently in the present. Ancient DNA turned human existence into a reminder of extraordinary improbability. The fact that any individual exists at all depends on endless generations surviving long enough to pass life forward. At the same time, ancient DNA encourages a different way of seeing humanity collectively. If every person carries traces of forgotten migrations and ancient mixture, then no individual stands outside the larger human story. Beneath modern divisions lies evidence of deep connection extending across continents and millennia. Humanity's history was never a set of isolated civilizations developing separately forever. It was a long network of encounters, adaptations, losses, and shared survival unfolding across changing worlds. Ancient DNA revealed that modern humans inherit not only the achievements remembered in history books, but also the hidden endurance of populations. History forgot almost completely. The closer scientists looked into the ancient genome, the more difficult it became to see any human life as disconnected from the broader human journey. Every body carries evidence of survival older than memory itself. Every person is partly composed of forgotten paths, continuing quietly into the present. Ancient DNA, therefore, changes more than history. It changes perspective. It reminds humanity that beneath modern identities lives an inheritance far older, more fragile, and more interconnected than most civilizations ever understood. Ancient DNA began by asking simple scientific questions about bones buried in caves, frozen ground, and forgotten graves. Over time, those questions opened into something much larger. The discoveries revealed migrations no history recorded, populations no civilization remembered, and connections hidden beneath modern identities for thousands of years. Yet after all the laboratories, genetic sequences, and reconstructed migrations, the deepest lesson of ancient DNA may not be about the past alone. It may be about how humans choose to see one another in the present. The farther scientists traced humanity backward through time, the more difficult it became to divide people into completely separate stories. Every population carried traces of earlier encounters. Every civilization emerged from older mixtures. Every human body preserved fragments of journeys stretching beyond memory itself. Ancient DNA revealed that humanity was never built from isolated paths, moving independently forever. It was built from continual contact, adaptation, and survival shared across generations. This realization does not erase human differences. Cultures remain meaningful. Languages shape identity. Traditions preserve memory and belonging. Ancient DNA does not ask people to abandon those things. Instead, it changes the scale of perspective. Beneath local identities lies a deeper human continuity, connecting modern lives to ancient worlds most civilizations forgot. The people living today inherit not only nations, religions, or family histories, but also the survival of countless forgotten individuals who crossed deserts, survived epidemics, endured climate collapse, and adapted to unfamiliar lands long before written history existed. Their names disappeared, their stories faded, yet traces of them continue quietly inside humanity itself. There is also humility in this discovery. Modern civilization often treats itself as permanent and advanced beyond the ancient past. Yet ancient DNA repeatedly showed how fragile societies become across deep time. Entire populations vanished after environmental shifts, disease outbreaks, or migrations transformed the world around them. Languages once spoken by millions disappeared completely. Civilizations that believed themselves eternal dissolved into ruins. The modern world is not separate from that pattern. Humans today still live inside biological systems shaped by ancient environments, still dependent on fragile ecological conditions, still vulnerable to forces larger than individual civilizations can fully control. Ancient DNA, therefore, becomes a reminder not only of connection, but also of responsibility. The future of humanity will eventually become part of the same long story future generations look back upon. At the same time, ancient DNA offers something unexpectedly hopeful. Despite extinctions, catastrophes, and immense uncertainty, human continuity survived. Small groups facing impossible conditions carried life forward again and again across thousands of generations. The modern human species exists because countless ancestors adapted instead of surrendering to instability. Some survived frozen climates. Others crossed oceans or mountains without knowing what waited ahead. Many lived through suffering history never recorded, yet they continued teaching children, preserving knowledge, building relationships, and searching for meaning even in uncertain worlds. Ancient DNA restored fragments of their existence, but it also revealed something enduring about humanity itself. Survival was never only biological, it also depended on cooperation, memory, learning, and connection between generations. This may be the most valuable lesson hidden inside the ancient genome. Human beings often search for permanence in nations, identities, or civilizations, yet history suggests change is unavoidable. The one constant across humanity's past has been adaptation guided by shared survival. Ancient DNA showed that no group remained untouched by movement or transformation forever. The human story continued because people repeatedly crossed boundaries, learned from one another, and carried fragments of older worlds into new ones. In this sense, humanity's greatest inheritance may not be purity or permanence, but resilience and connection across time. As the story finally returns to the silence where it began, the ancient world no longer feels completely lost. Beneath every modern city, beneath every language still spoken tonight, beneath every person drifting slowly towards sleep, survive traces of forgotten journeys stretching back through thousands of generations. The bones uncovered by scientists did more than reveal extinct populations or ancient migrations. They revealed that the past never vanished entirely. It continued moving quietly through the living world, hidden inside people who no longer remembered where those paths began. Ancient DNA uncovered fragments of humanity's lost roads, but countless others remain buried beneath time, waiting in silence beyond memory. And perhaps the strangest truth of all is this: every human being alive today is both an ending and a continuation. The temporary meeting point of ancient lives that disappeared long ago, yet still remain here, breathing softly through the future they unknowingly created. So when future generations look backward at humanity as it exists now, what forgotten traces of us will still remain inside them long after our own world has been lost?